Hello everyone. If you are new to my channel, then consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do it, thanks. By the way, I also have a Luffy fan fiction channel. If you are interested, the link is in the description. Dragonslayer by KitsuneDragon. He said he saw great potential in my small body and he raised me. Because of him I lived, I learned, and I finally found someone I could call friend, even if he didn't call me the same. I am his son. I am his student, the Dragonslayer of Aknologia. I don't own anything. Adios.
Snow peaks, northern Fiorian mountains. Fury, a flash of violet light dyed the white blanket of snow with its color before vanishing just as quickly as it came. When the flash of light died down, the magic seal vanished as well to reveal its user. Ultir Milkovich, daughter of the Ice Master, and twin sister to Yugito ni Milkovich, was shown to have been the user of the formerly active teleportation spell. The younger twin glanced around the snow-covered lands before spying the small cabin that was her sister's home. Running a hand through her long dark hair, Ultir trudged through the thick snow. A noticeable trail was left behind by her boot-covered feet. She raised the fur-lined cloak she wore to shield herself from the cold before reaching the door of the house. Ultir sighed as she raised her hand and gripped the doorknob. "She better have a good reason to call me out here," Ultir muttered. "Yugito knows how much I despise the cold." Ultir twisted the doorknob and the door swung inwards as she pushed it open. "Alright, Yugito, what's this emergency you called me for?" The Arc of Time user glanced around the small house. The couch and recliner chairs, usually Yugito's favorite sitting places, were bare. The fire crackled as the timber was burning, but there was no evidence to show that Matabi had been present within the flames as she always had been. Ultir frowned as she noted that the house was uncharacteristically silent. As she glanced around, the muscle beneath her eye twitched to personify her annoyance. She gritted her teeth and snapped her head in the direction of the cat-like clock. Its wide eyes shifted from left to right and its tail swung in tandem, like a pendulum, to the ticking sound it released. That infernal ticking. She really should get rid of that damn thing," Ultir muttered as she massaged her temples. She looked around the living area, just to make sure that her sister wasn't just hiding behind the furniture waiting to jump her and grope her like she always did. Once the dark-haired mage made sure her twin wasn't lurking behind the couch or chairs, she made her way to the kitchen area. She peeked her head through the passageway and glanced left and right. "Yugito," she called out. She took a tentative step into the dimly lit eating area. "Matabi?" There was no response from the blue and black furred exceed either. Ultir glanced around the room before settling her black eyes on the small kitchen table. Sitting on the tabletop was a single white ceramic cup. Ultir bent down and saw the wisps of steam rising forth from its bowels. She sniffed the mug's contents. "Jasmine tea. My favorite kind." She wrapped her hand around the mug's handle and frowned as she noticed it wasn't boiling hot, but it was still hot enough to make her retract her hand to prevent herself from burning her skin. "Yugito made it recently. Either she made it for herself and didn't feel to drink it or she made it for me and was to wait for me here," Ultir thought. She sat herself down at the table for two and sipped the mug of tea. "Either way, this is very strange behavior for my sister." Ultir continued to drink the hot liquid and after a minute or two, finally downed the entirety of the drink. She rested the mug down on the table with a hollow clack, seeming to echo through the house. Ultir stared at the mug with a thoughtful expression on her face. First her twin sister calls her out to come home, saying she had something urgent to tell her. She comes and finds that said sister nor her feline partner were present and now there's a hot cup of tea with no one to drink it. She continued to play through the scenarios of what possibly could have caused her sister to act so strangely. Thunk. However, she was quickly snapped out of her thoughts as the loud sound echoed through the house. Ultir glanced upwards from where the thunk had originated. The sound had come through the floor of the room which lay above it and traveled through the ceiling of the kitchen. Ultir rose from her seat at the kitchen table and quickly went past the living room and reached the small flight of stairs. Her brown boots left small dots of moisture due to there having been some leftover snow present on her footwear. As she reached the top of the stairs, she glanced down the narrow hallway. She began to walk down it. She glanced behind her and scowled when she saw the guest room at the opposite end of the hallway. The room where her mother's substitutes for her had made their living quarters. She then spotted the center room and gave a much softer gaze. Her sister's room. This center room would have been the room that she and Yugito would have shared, but due to her illness placing her in the Bureau of Magic Development for therapy and curing, coupled with her alleged death, the room that had once been made to house two people was reduced to a one-person bedroom. She traced the cat head that had been carved into the wooden plaque that lay on the door's surface. Ul-chan and Yugi-chan's room, was what the plaque read. Even after all those years, her sister and mother had refused to carve out her name from the plaque. Ultir shook her head to rid herself of the guilt she felt. "No, Okage-chan. Abandoned me at that facility. I can't feel guilty for the woman who left me alone and replaced me, Altair continued her trek down the seemingly endless hallway before stopping in front of the large pair of mahogany doors. Due to the house's layout, this was the only room which would have allowed sound to travel through its flooring to the kitchen area. After all, the room lay directly above the kitchen. The lone plaque seemed to mock her as she stared at it. Hokage-chan's room. Altair clenched her hands tightly, her knuckles popping from the force. She quickly shook her head from side to side, forcing down her anger and ridding herself of the murderous thoughts. The grimoire heart mage took a deep breath and walked towards the door of her deceased mother. She tentatively gripped the handles of the double doors before pushing them open. Insert music. 2 steps from Hell Cassandra, the doors slowly parted. Altair wanted to enter quietly, but the doors chose to play the song of their people as they creaked loudly in comparison to the silence which reigned supreme in the wooden household. Altair gulped audibly as she slowly entered the room. She looked around the room and found that it was exactly as she had expected. It was a very large room with a large futon laying on the floor. 2 side tables were placed on either side of the futon and there was a large wardrobe cupboard placed near the window. The light from outside, despite the never-ending snowfall and dark clouds, managed to cast enough light into the room so that the dark-haired mage could see the room in its entirety. This also included her blonde sister and her exceed partner. Yugito was sitting cross-legged on the large futon, her dark eyes staring directly at her younger twin. Mitabi was sitting on her shoulder, her pupil-less eyes seeming as if they were gazing into her soul. The green and yellow orbs seemed to shine like an emerald and gold respectively, and her fiery tail swished lazily behind her. A brief silence passed between the two parties and Altair then decided to take her seat in front of her sister. She sat in the same position as her sister and nodded to them in acknowledgement. She raised a curious eyebrow as she wasn't given the same courtesy. "Yugito, what is it that you wanted me for?" Altair asked. She didn't want to beat around the bush. "If you wanted to grope and nuzzle my breasts again, you could have waited until after I was finished with my work. I've been very busy as one of the 7 kin of purgatory." Yugito couldn't help the smirk that formed on her face. "That's cute, Imoudo-chan, but dealing with your chest is not what I called you here for." "What we called you here for?" Altair's curiosity increased significantly as she glanced between the fire using feline and her takeover magic using sibling. She asked. Yugito's and Mitabi's eyes turned to each other before focusing on Altair once more. A serious look formed on their faces. Yugito tugged downwards on her black and violet shirt's collar and displayed her impressive cleavage. However, her younger twin proved to have been the better of the two. The blonde takeover mage then pulled out the 2 small vials which held the hairs of the Ogo no Fujin and the Onibi Myobo. Yugito held it up for her younger sister by 1 minute before tossing it into the air. Altair's eyes followed the tossed piece of glass and managed to see the gleam of Yugito's lengthened nails slicing the vial and its contents into slivers and shreds before those remnants were reduced to nothing as Mitabi sent a small ball of hellfire at the airborne objects. Altair's eyes widened before she looked to her sister with anger written all over her face. "Yugito, what have you done?" Altair exclaimed. "You can't even track them down now that you've destroyed their DNA. Now we'll never be able to keep an eye on them and what they're planning." Yugito and Mitabi shook their heads at the young woman's words. "We're done." Altair's eyes shifted from showing her rage to showing complete and utter astonishment. What? "I said we're done, Altair." The younger Milkovich twin winced at her sister's usage of her first name. It was usually Ul-chan, Imoudo-chan or Ul-nya, but with the absence of any sort of cat-related dialogue and her serious gaze, it showed that her sister and her partner meant business. "But Yugito, Oni-chan, you've been following him to help me for so long," Altair shouted, her arms spread wide to display her emotion. "Why now?" "Altair." Mitabi was the one who spoke this time. "We've always done what we can to help you with whatever you do. You joining a dark guild like Grimoire Heart, finding out information on these 2 SS-class criminals, we've supported you through it all. But we draw the line here and now. We will no longer be helping you in tracking down and finding out information on the Ogo no Fujin and the Onibi Myobo. Please, just tell me why." Altair pleaded with her sister and friend to answer her. Yugito sighed and ran a hand through her long blonde hair. "We were caught," Yugito replied. "What?" Altair looked at her sister in disbelief. "You're the best at stealth, the best person in the field that I know of. How is it possible for you to have been caught by those?" "Because he figured us out. He possesses a spy network of his own, Altair. Mitabi-chan and I can't compete with resources like his," Yugito replied. "His sources spotted us in a Caliphate town and we were personally brought to his headquarters to be questioned. I tried to adhere to your wishes and try to squeeze information out of him, but eventually, and I don't know how, he recognized my scent from one of my earlier meetings with him when I had disguised myself as a regular stray cat." The elder Milkovich paused as she glanced at her sister's disbelieving gaze. "Yugito and I were then told of how he nearly killed you on 2 occasions. Explain those situations." "Yugito. Mitabi, I. Altair Yukino Milkovich, you will answer me when I tell you to explain your situation." Yugito spoke firmly to her sister. Ultir's strong will crumbled as she saw the fierce look in her sister's cat-like eyes. Never before had the older twin used her younger sister's full name. Ultir remained silent for a few moments as she stared fearfully at her sister. She then bowed her head and nodded. The first was during our initial encounter, when we tried to get him to join us. It was when Azuma and Zankro had been sent out with me to deal with him. I fought him for a little while, but Zankro and Azuma had intervened before anything major could happen. She explained. As for the second time, it was during a mission I had on Galuna Island to find Deliora's body after it was frozen by Ur. Deliora was still alive. No, Ultir shook her head at Matabi's question. The Fujin made sure of that after blowing up the entire temple. Yugito and Matabi looked at the younger Milkovich with a deep frown present on both their faces. Well, Ultir, it was because of those incidents that he was able to strike a nerve in me, Yugito spoke. What do you mean? When the Fujin told me how he nearly killed you on those 2 occasions, you know very well how protective I have of you. I snapped and tried to attack him, but I failed. I failed miserably. Yugito's hands clenched tightly into fists. And it was from my level of protectiveness towards you that he pieced together the fact that we are siblings. He did? Matabi nodded. Ultir, you must also know that the Onibi Myobu is my eldest brother. Another one of the 9? Like Shukaku? Matabi nodded in response to Ultir's words. She confirmed for the dark-haired mage. Kurama Oni-san is the strongest of us 9 and we cannot stand against him. He is strong enough to take on 5 of us at the same time and still manage to come out victorious. There was a time Kakuo, Isobu, Chome, Seiken and I all tried to take him down in one of our more destructive play fights and we all got our asses handed to us. Ultir, we cannot compete with such power. The Ogono Fujin is powerful in his own right as well. I said it once and I will say it again. Matabi and I are retiring from your mission request. We will no longer pursue the Ogono Fujin and Onibi Myobu and we will no longer be reporting to you to give you any sort of information on him. But, Ul-chan. Yugito looked at her sister with a pleading look in her eyes. Please, I'm telling you, give up on this pointless mission. It took us too long to find those 2 again after we lost the trail after the battle against Gildart's Clive of Fairy Tale. And now he knows my relation to you, Ul-chan. He's not afraid to exploit information and use his powers to get what he wants. I'm doing this to protect you, Ul-chan. So please, stop trying to follow those 2. Ultir was silent as she stared at her sister. Yugito's pleading gaze met her own wide-eyed one. Never before had she seen her sister so vulnerable, so emotionally weak, so afraid. It was then that Ultir moved a bit closer to the blonde and gripped her shoulders tightly. Oni-chan. Ultir spoke softly. What happened to you when you met the Ogono Fujin? Yugito's eyes widened at the question. Matabi turned away when the dark-haired Milkovich faced her, but the expression of fear was still present on the Exceed's face. It was when Ultir faced her sister once more that said sister chose to speak again. He was terrifying. Yugito's hands snaked their way up to her neck and she massaged her throat. The phantom feeling of being held in that iron grip was still present with her. Never before have I felt such raw power and ferocity from a person. His killing intent was immense, with just a gaze. He made feel true fear. Yugito hugged her body tightly, squeezing her shoulders as she looked at the ground. I did my best to try and force away the feeling after we met him, Ul-chan. I really did. Yugito released a choked sob. But I couldn't, Ul-chan. I can't go back to feeling like that. I can't go back to looking for a man who could make me feel so weak and helpless while trying to remain strong for you. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for letting you down, Imo-udo-chan. Ultir's eyes were wide as she saw her sister break down in front of her. She looked to Matabi and watched as the heterochromatic Exceed stroked the crying blonde's head. Ultir slowly removed her hands from her sister's shoulders and then wrapped her arms around her. Yugito sobbed into her sister's clothing, darkening the fabric with her tears. Ultir ran her right hand through her sister's long hair while rubbing her back with her left. Shush, it's okay. She spoke with a hushed tone. And actually, if it's anything, I should actually be the one apologizing. I was the one who made you and Matabi-chan go against those who came to you all for help. Ultir held her sister a bit tighter. Oni-chan. I'm sorry for putting you through that. Ultir felt a lone tear escape from her right eye. And I'm sorry to you too, Matabi-chan. I put you up against your older brother without even realizing it. It's okay. I at least got to meet him on relatively friendly terms before things went south upon us being discovered as spies. Matabi smiled sadly. But please, Ul-chan. Promise us that you'll stay out of the way of those 2. Kurama Oni-san and the Fujin are dead set in whatever it is they aim to accomplish. They will use every resource they have at their disposal if it means achieving what they want, and Oni-san is not one to do things such as carrying out incomplete tasks. Ultir rocked back and forth as her sister continued to cry into her bosom. She thought through what it was that her friend was telling her to do. She was now put in danger because of her foolish actions to pursue the kingdom of Fiore's most dangerous duo. She put her family in danger and now she couldn't even do one shit to stop what happened to said family. Yugito and Matabi were too afraid of the duo and it was all her fault. She had done it numerous times. To the grunts of Grimoire Heart, to Merity, to Master Hades, but when it came to her family, to Yugito and Matabi, it was with gut-wrenching difficulty that she was to carry out the act of lying. Never in her life had she lied to what remained of her broken family, but desperate times called for desperate measures. I'm sorry Oni-chan. Matabi-chan. But not after what has happened to you too. I can't let this slide. She then nodded her head to the exceed. She felt the guilt pool in her throat, forming a lump there. Ultir forcibly swallowed the lump in her throat and an apologetic tear escaped her tear ducts. She then nodded her head rapidly and more tears flowed down her pale-skinned face. The dark-haired mage took in a shaky breath and exhaled. And with that, the untruthful words flowed from her lips. I promise. Unknown area, would see, Fury Juranikis, member of the 10 Wizard Saints, groaned as he rose to his feet. He raised his hand to his pounding skull as he felt pain from it. He winced as he withdrew his hand and looked to see some blood decorating his fingers. What happened? The Lamina Scale mage wondered. He then glanced down at the ground and saw a single white feather laying before him. It was unlike any bird feather he had ever seen before. What is? His skull pulsed and gripped it in pain and suddenly the memories of what happened prior to his falling unconscious returned. That's right, Oracion Siete. Jura gritted his teeth and clenched his hands into tight fists. I was blindsided by Angel and her celestial spirit. I must go find the others. The earth magic user quickly ran through the woods, leaping over large tree roots and avoiding any wild animals that he would have encountered. He looked straight ahead to the path before him. His beady black eyes widened as he suddenly felt an unknown magic energy signature. Digging his sandals into the ground, the wizard saint skidded along the ground, kicking up a small of dust before coming to a halt. Quickly ducking behind a tree, the bald mage peeked around the trunk. His eyes narrowed as he spotted the 7-foot-tall giant that was Zabrak Granful. The silver-eyed density magic user was walking through the foliage and Jura followed the man's path and realized that the muscle-bound mage was moving in the direction which led to the Light Guild Alliance's meeting place. Jura gritted his teeth and followed the dark mage's path with his eyes. The brown cloak billowed behind the lumbering giant and Jura smirked as Zabrak's back was now facing him. Jura decided to take his chance to strike at the Oracion Siete mage and channeled his magic energy. He raised his hands high into the air before crashing them down forcefully onto the tree root-covered ground. Insert music. Shingeki no Kyojin Ridai Kido, Earth Magic, Iron Rock Spikes. Jura roared. The earth rumbled greatly and Zabrak raised his eyebrows in surprise at the sudden shifting of the ground. Zabrak turned around and his silver eyes narrowed in annoyance as he saw his opponent that was Jura Niki's. However, the view of said opponent was quickly obscured as the earth split apart and then ejected numerous sharp-tipped spires. The spikes of rock impaled trees and other forms of vegetation before a large number of them burst up around Zabrak and crashed into his large body. Trees toppled and the earth cracked from the force of the collision as the rock spikes slammed into the Oracion Siete member's body. A large cloud of dust and dirt drifted around the area and Juras smirked victoriously. The bald Lamina Scale mage clapped his hands together as if he had just taken out the trash. Well, that was easy, the wizard saint said confidently. Jura then turned around and began to walk away, now to look for the others. The wizard saint paused in his movement however, as he heard the sound of a deep, distorted chuckle. Jura's beady eyes widened as he turned around to see the smoke cloud dispersing. Zabrak stood tall amongst the multitude of rock spikes. His heavy cloak was torn in a few places, but the visible areas of skin didn't have any form of damage. Instead, the tips of the rock spikes were broken, some only slightly cracked. An admirable effort to defeat me. Zabrak spoke in his slightly distorted voice as he adjusted the mask that was attached to his face. However, it will take more than a few rocks and the element of surprise to fell me. Zabrak flexed his large muscles and spread apart his arms. The rock spikes which were crowded around him broke apart and flew off in random directions, being lost in the brush. Jura Nikis, member of the 10 Wizard Saints. You have saved me the trouble of finding you. I thank you for that. Why were you looking for me? The bald mage asked. Simply to test my abilities. A member of the 10 Wizard Saints is sure to pose a challenge to a lowly dark mage such as myself. Zabrak spoke with a hint of sarcasm. Zabrak reached over to a few of the rock spikes that weren't completely broken. Gripping the large stone protrusions tightly, Zabrak gave a small grunt of effort before wrenching the earthen objects from the ground. Jura's eyes widened in awe as he saw his opponent holding the gargantuan spikes in his hands as if they were fluffy pillows. I do not sense any form of magic energy to be able to lift such heavy and large stone spikes. Jura was brought out of his thoughts as Zabrak reared his arms back and threw the 2 spikes at him. Twisting his wrist as he threw them, the rock spikes now had a dangerous rotation speed so they were now akin to drills. Jurek quickly slammed his hands on the ground. Earth magic. Stone wall. The wall of rock erupted from in front of Jura. The spikes turned drills impacted harshly with the rock wall, and Jura's eyes widened as he saw large cracks appear on his shield as the spikes broke through his defense. He released a small bead of sweat as the sharp spikes came to a halt, the tips only a few centimeters away from having made contact with his face. Releasing a sigh of relief, Jurek quickly began to back away from his rock wall. The rock wall suddenly shattered and Jura's eyes widened in shock as Zabrak busted through the thick shield of earth. Jurek coughed up spittle as Zabrak's shoulder crashed into his chest, knocking the wind from his lungs and sending him rolling along the ground. Jura managed to right himself, digging his fingers into the ground to stop his skidding motion before raising his head and wheezing heavily. Clutching his chest, the wizard saint aimed to catch his breath, but didn't have enough time as he suddenly found his chin being met with a very powerful force. Zabrak's boot-covered foot slammed against his lower jaw, causing it to meet his upper jaw with a resounding clack, from Jura's perspective of course, and Jura found himself eye into a tree, the impact causing the bark to break. Jura gritted his teeth as he raised his head. Zabrak sprinted towards him, the ground beneath the Oracion Siete mage's feet cracking with each heavy step. Zabrak released a distorted-sounding roar as he reared back his fist, but Jura quickly reacted, twisting at his hip. Jura's palm deflected the powerful strike to his right and made sure to keep his surprise to a minimum, which was very hard to do seeing as how Zabrak's fist caused the bark of the massive tree to break apart as if it were made of glass. Jura then slammed his hands on the ground and a large magic seal appeared beneath the two combatants. Earth magic. Iron rock spikes. Two massive spikes of earth jutted out of the ground and slammed into Zabrak's abdominal area. While the sharp rocks couldn't penetrate the dense skin of the silver-haired titan, it did manage to spear two holes in his cloak and undershirt as well as produce enough driving force to send the large man back and give Jura some breathing room. Jura took a deep breath and sighed in mild ecstasy as he regained a suitable amount of oxygen in his system. Being rejuvenated, the bald mage slammed his fists together in preparation. Raising his arms high into the air, Jura gave a roar of effort before slamming them down onto the ground. Earth magic. Doryuden. A massive dragon head suddenly burst forth from the ground. Zabrak's eyes widened as he was impressed with the size of the earthen reptile. The earth dragon roared menacingly as it bared its sharp rock fangs, its glowing yellow eyes meeting Zabrak's silver ones. The dragon reared back its head before bombarding Zabrak with a numerous amount of fast-paced rock and mud projectiles. Zabrak raised his arms in an X-shaped manner and skidded backwards as the first attack slammed into him. Realizing that even with his dense skin and musculature that the attack still posed a threat to him, Zabrak quickly turned and chopped a tree down with his hands. The massive piece of vegetation fell over as the second and third rock bombs slammed into the tree. The tree was split into three, splinters and rock flying every which way. Zabrak's eyes widened when a fourth and fifth rock bomb scored hits against his chest. The impact was enough to momentarily make him lose his balance as well as make him cough as his breathing was compromised. An ear-splitting roar echoed through the air and Zabrak could only watch with widened eyes as the earth dragon Jura had summoned was not only just a head, but also had a lengthy body attached to it. The dragon roared before racing through the air. The shadow of the massive dragon easily encompassed the 7-foot-tall mage and crashed against his chest. Zabrak grunted as the dragon's hard muzzle impacted with his chest and then dragged him along the ground, a trench being carved as a result. A few trees collapsed as well before the earth dragon clamped its fangs down on the massive mage and swung its head around so as to throw Zabrak through the air and into a tree. The tree and Zabrak fell to the ground. Zabrak groaned as he rubbed his head before rising back to his feet. Shaking his head fro side to side to rid it of the dizziness, he looked up to see Jura landing in front of him. The wizard saint growled in annoyance. "How are you uninjured from that attack?" he asked. Not even the sturdiest of mages could withstand that much damage without earning some form of injury. "I've trained my body to become as tough as iron." A mage is identified by their use of magic, but I was not one who had the luxury of being able to use magic during my time in that towering hell. Zabrak's hands became tight fists. I made an oath to myself that I would make my body strong in every definition of the word. Endurance, durability, power. I earned it all with blood, sweat and tears. Mages who rely solely on magic are not truly strong. Now let me show you the strength I have gained from living in purgatory. Zabrak turned and his fingers dug deeply into the bark of the tree he had collided with due to Jura's earth dragon. Jura could only watch with wide eyes as the massive tree was lifted over Zabrak's head. The 7-foot-tall mage's muscles bulged, veins stretching across his skin and very visible to the naked eye. With a roar, Zabrak swung the tree like a bat. The attack was seemingly slow, but Jura could see that the power of the strike was no joke. Conjuring up an earth wall, Jura quickly ducked behind his defense and the massive oak tree shattered against the earth wall. The sturdy rock was then met with Jura's palm and Jura pumped a bit of magic into the wall. Earth magic. Mountain collider. The earth wall was pushed forwards by Jura's palm strike and tore a trench in the ground. The masked titan crossed his arms as the earth wall slammed into his body. However, Zabrak dug his boots into the ground to remain stationary, and remain stationary he did. The earth wall crashed harshly against Zabrak, but the silver-haired dark mage's durability proved to be great as a Zabrak-sized hole had been torn through the wall as it continued on its path, crumbling due to Jura's surprise at seeing his physically unharmed adversary. Shaking the rubble off of his body, Zabrak stomped his feet on the ground and Jura suddenly began to teeter as he lost his balance. "He's shaking the ground with a stomp?" Jura thought with surprise. Zabrak then reached behind him and tore off 2 large chunks of rock that belonged to Jura's former earth wall and threw them at their former user. Jura quickly ducked beneath the first one and went into a forward roll to avoid the second. Jura then planted a hand on the ground and a massive magic seal formed. Earth Magic. 100 Fists. A multitude of earth fists rose up from the ground behind Jura and followed their user's orders. The earthen fists soared through the air and went towards Zabrak. Zabrak chuckled. Using his density magic, Zabrak adjusted the density of the air around him. Silver and black magic energy swirled into his hands along with the dense air, condensing into a compact orb of destruction. Density Magic. Ryusei. A massive bullet of dense air was shot forth from Zabrak's hands and slammed into a large number of the incoming earth fists. The dense air shattered the hard earth and created a large smoke cloud, but a large remainder of Jura's spell continued on their path. 5 went in to score some blows, but Zabrak quickly lashed out with destructive punches, cracking them and halting their movements before twisting to avoid 2 more. Leaping to the side, 3 more attacks were avoided before he rolled on the ground and went with his momentum to avoid another barrage of earthen strikes. Zabrak quickly rose to his feet and lashed out with a strong kick to completely destroy 1 fist before sending out 2 dense air bullets. The Ryusei spell shattered a few more of Jura's attacks before Zabrak began to charge towards Jura. Leaping to the sides and forward rolling, Zabrak avoided the multitude of attacks that followed after him as he moved in towards his bald opponent. Jura's eyes widened as he noticed his superhuman-like opponent growing close to him. Jura clapped his hands together and suddenly the earth fists encircled Zabrak's body. Earth Magic. Rock King Crusher. The rock fists then all stopped their circling motion and rocketed towards Zabrak's body. Zabrak raised his arms and gritted his teeth in annoyance as the large rocks slammed against his iron-hard skin. His silver eyes glowed with power before he released a pulse of magic energy that tore apart the ground beneath him while simultaneously sending every single rock projectile away from him. The earth caved inwards, shaking and shifting from the magical pressure exerted from the mask-wearing titan. The earth magic user quickly raised his arms to protect his face from the rocks and dust. When the dust cloud died down, Jura's eyes widened in awe as he gazed upon the result of his opponent's counter-maneuver. Zabrak growled as he stood wid and Jura was standing on the edge of it. You monstrosity! Jura gasped out. Zabrak tensed his legs muscles and bent his knees. I've been called worse. Zabrak leapt high into the air, out of his crater. Jura quickly jumped to the side as Zabrak descended. The silver-haired man's arms impacted harshly with the earth and resulted in the formation of another crater. Jura rolled with the shockwave generated from Zabrak's attack, but Zabrak had already removed himself from his latest indentation in the ground. Jura quickly positioned his body and placed his hands against Zabrak's chest and fell backwards with Zabrak's fall and went with the momentum. Planting his feet against his opponent's abdominal area and tensing his legs and arms, the bald wizard saint pushed off so that Zabrak's forward momentum sent him flying through the air. Having gone with the rolling motion of his overhead toss, Jura went into a backwards roll and began to drag his arms on the ground. The earth gathered around his arms and legs to form a pair of earthen gauntlets and boots. A sturdy chest plate as well as other armor-like formations began to coat the wizard saint. In the end, Jura was now a walking stone giant that towered at 9 feet tall. The only part that wasn't covered by the rock armor was Jura's face. Earth Magic. Rock Knight. Zabrak flipped in the air from Jura's earlier toss and landed heavily on the ground, cracking it. With a snarl, the heavyweight fighter dug his boots into the ground and sped towards his armored opponent. Jura sped forth as well, the earth shaking from both their fast-paced steps. With a roar, their fists reared back and impacted with one another. A massive shockwave erupted from the point of collision and the earth cracked beneath their feet. Jura quickly twisted and slammed his armored elbow against Zabrak's skull, but the Titan of Oracion Siete grabbed the 9-foot-tall rock giant and hurled him over his head. Jura's eyes were wide from the shock of having been thrown through the air by the dark mage. Sure, the man was strong enough to pick up a rooted oak tree with his bare hands, but his rock knight form weighed significantly more than a simple tree. The fact that he was now tumbling through the air spoke volumes of how unbelievably strong the silver-haired dark mage was. Flipping in midair, Jura righted himself and landed on his feet before charging once more. Zabrak went in for a kick, but Jura leapt over it and delivered a kick of his own. Zabrak quickly retracted his leg and crossed his arms, blocking the kick. The bottom of the earth boot cracked. Jura then went in for a two-hit combo and slammed both gauntlets against Zabrak's face, sending the taller man stumbling backwards before spinning and crashing two roundhouse kicks to either side of his body. Jura gritted his teeth as he saw his earth armaments crack and break apart in various places due to Zabrak's superhuman durability. With a roar, Jura grabbed Zabrak and with unbelievable strength, swung him overhead and slammed him into the ground before pinning him down in a headlock. Zabrak released wheezes and heavy breaths as the massive earth knight that was Jura Niki's began to restrict his airflow. Zabrak began to chuckle. His chuckling became louder and louder. Jura snarled at how his adversary was behaving and began to apply more pressure in an attempt to stop Zabrak's sounds of amusement. Jura began to squeeze tighter and tighter around his opponent's throat, but to no avail. The distorted-sounding laughter then calmed down and Zabrak glanced back at his captor. An admirable effort, Jura Niki's. Zabrak's hands gripped the armor of Jura's Rock Knight spell. His muscles tensed, bulging outwards, and Jura's eyes widened as he felt the force of the squeeze through his armor. However, my strength is not to be underestimated. I am physically stronger than any other mage you will ever come across. The earth armor around Jura began to crack and break apart at a rapid rate. Jura eyed the spiderweb of cracks that raced across his armor with shock written across his face. And engaging me in close combat was where you sealed your fate. Zabrak roared before using his titanic strength to continue to squeeze his opponent's earth-encased arms until the stress finally got to it. The earth armor broke apart at the arms, and with the grip around his throat being removed, Zabrak brought his arm forward and then brought it backwards in a sweeping arc so that his elbow crashed into Jura's ribs with devastating force. The snapping of Jura's ribs was positively deafening and blood flew from the wizard saint's lips. Zabrak then spun around and punched Jura in the sternum area. The chest armor shattered like glass and more blood flew from Jura's lips. Zabrak went down low and spun around so that a strong kick slammed against Jura's right leg. A snap was heard this time as Jura's femur was fractured. Reversing his rotation, Zabrak performed the same action and crushed the armor surrounding Jura's left leg and fracturing the femur of the leg there as well. The bald wizard saint was then punched across the face with enough force to break his jaw. Jura was about to fly through the air, but Zabrak would have none of it. Leaving so soon? I think not. Zabrak had lashed out and grabbed Jura by his right arm. The strain from the sudden halt made Jura's body move, but not his arm, resulting in a sickening pop as the arm was removed from its shoulder socket. Jura's scream of agony filled the air. Zabrak then rained blows down upon his breaking opponent. Zabrak tossed Jura to the ground, but the wizard saint's pride and will to fight kept him from truly falling as he rolled with his fall and steadily climbed to his feet. Oh, still standing? I may be weakened, but I will not lose. Jura's eyes blazed with determination. I am Jura Niki's of the wizard saints. I will not fall. Jura unleashed a battle cry as his magic spiked. However, before he could cast his spell, the shadow of the 7-foot-tall man encompassed him. Zabrak hovered over Jura. The silver eyes of the Oracion Siete mage glowed with power. Fall, oh Jura. That is very true. Zabrak gripped Jura's hands and squeezed them tightly so that the metacarpal and carpal bones were broken apart, effectively preventing the bald mage from using any of his spells, which required him to make contact with the earth with his hands. You will not fall. You will be broken. Jura released a roar as he went to punch Zabrak, but his eyes widened as a sickening crunch was heard. With a grunt of pain, Jura retracted his hand and looked at his knuckles in shock to find them broken. I told you my durability is not to be underestimated, Jura Niki's. Zabrak lashed out with a punch to the face. Jura's head twisted with the force of the blow before Zabrak spun and slammed an elbow against his right side. Jura's ribs cracked before Zabrak rotated once more and the roundhouse kick effectively broke the curved bones. A glob of blood flew forth from Jura's lips, preventing his screams from being heard at their maximum. Zabrak then gripped Jura by the side of his face and with a roar, slammed Jura harshly into the ground with enough force to leave an imprint and crack the ground. Zabrak stepped back to admire his handiwork before giving a nod of satisfaction as Jura didn't move. However, as he turned around, a spire of earth shot up and impacted with his back. Don't count me out. Yet, Zabrak's eyes narrowed as he stumbled forward. Without even looking back, he broke the spire into two with a harsh back kick before he leapt into the air while spinning. Using the momentum of his spin, Zabrak brought down a crushing overhead swing that impacted with Jura's skull as the wizard saint attempted to climb back to his feet. Gripping the hairless skull tightly, he raised Jura's head and slammed it back down once more. The process was repeated 3 more times before the wizard saint was raised up. A powerful punch to the stomach effectively knocked the wind before Zabrak began spinning him around. Still keeping a tight grip on the wizard saint, Zabrak used the momentum from his spinning to bring Jura over his head and slam him harshly into the ground. Jura released a cry of pain as his back felt as if it were about to break from the impact. The ground was even cracked beneath him. Zabrak let go of the earth manipulator and chuckled in amusement as he saw Jura cough up blood and spittle. Jura panted heavily, his face twisted to the side so that he would not be eating the dirt. The earth user was unable to move due to his bones being broken in all 4 of his limbs. His tibia and fibula in both legs were broken and his femurs cracked. The radius and ulna in both arms were broken and the right arm had been effectively removed from its shoulder socket. 5 of his ribs were broken and his diaphragm was hemorrhaging, hence the continuous coughing up of blood as he tried to rise to his feet. Ah yes, I was wondering what would break first. Zabrak gripped the struggling Jura by the back of his clothes and hoisted the strong-willed mage over his head. Your spirit. He swung Jura down while raising his knee upwards. Or your body. Crack. The hard joint impacted harshly against the wizard saint's lower back and a loud crack echoed through the air, accompanied by Jura's painful cry as he writhed on the ground. Zabrak watched as Jura continued to writhe and scream. His body bent painfully due to his shifted spinal cord, before finally succumbing to the pain of his injuries and blacked out. Zabrak stared at the unconscious wizard saint and nodded in satisfaction. If not for his superhuman durability, Zabrak would have had a much more difficult time facing the wizard saint. The bald mage was worthy of his title, but a loss was a loss and a win was a win in Zabrak's book. The silver-haired dark mage then turned and walked away from the fallen earth magic user. While walking, the silver-haired giant raised an eyebrow as he felt a tingle in his mind. Seems Brain got the sky brat. Zabrak thought as he received Brain's telepathic message. Midnight should still be at the original area, seeing as how he was still asleep when we left him. Guess I'll go pick him up. Insert music. 2 steps from Hell Archangel, unknown area, Northern Wood Sea, Fury. Rolling on the ground, Lucy, Taurus and Angel finally came to a stop within the Woodsea forests. Due to the collision with the ground weakening Lucy's grip, the Kusarigama's chain had slackened and thus the white-haired dark mage managed to free her constricted leg just as Lucy pulled the weighted chain back towards her. Taurus twirled his double-bladed axe in his hands while the angel Michael stood beside its respective user, spear in hand. Lucy's brown eyes narrowed as she gripped her scythe and chain weapon before spinning the weighted end of the chain. With expert precision, she hurled the weighted chain at Michael, but the angel merely tilted its head to avoid the strike while Angel flapped her small wings and took to the skies. Lucy quickly retracted her chain, but Michael grabbed the chain by the weight so that it didn't return to its wielder. Lucy's eyes widened as the stone angel turned its cold gaze on her. Shit, was all she could say before she was tugged forward by the angel's strength. Lucy flew through the air, but quickly flipped in the air as she went with her momentum. She curled into a ball before lashing out with a powerful dual straight kick, her boots slamming harshly against the stone warrior's chest. However, Michael made no motion whatsoever and left Lucy with quite a bit of pain in her feet. However, a shadow covered both combatants as Taurus leapt into the air, axe held over his head. For Lucis, the bipedal bull roared. Don't use her that as a battle cry, you perverted bovine. Michael merely held Lucy up, using her as a human shield, but to the angel's user's surprise, Taurus had quickly vanished from view as a shower of golden dust and a flash of light. Lucy had done a forced closure as she held the key for Taurus in her hands. However, what came next was completely unexpected as Lucy spun the key in her fingers and pointed it behind Michael. Gate of the Bull, I open thee. Taurus emerged from the sky in a flash of golden light, directly behind the winged stone warrior. It was as if Taurus had never lost the momentum he had from his earlier attempt to attack as he dropped down. With a deafening moo, the axe-wielding bovine crashed down on the ground and quickly spun on his heels. The low horizontal strike sliced through Michael's legs like it was made of wet cement, and the angel ended up dropping Lucy to the ground. Going with the momentum of his spin, Taurus raised his axe overhead and then brought it down and easily severed the angel's stone wings from its shoulder blades. The final blow was then struck as Taurus once again brought down the axe. He released a moo while bringing his golden weapon down in a downward arc. The stone angel dropped down and the blonde quickly rose back to her feet before kicking Michael in his stomach. The angel was revealed to have been perfectly bisected by Taurus's strike, and the angel split apart into its 2 halves and then vanished as rubble and magic energy. She performed a forced closure and resummed so quickly. Angel muttered as she looked down at the smirking celestial spirit mage. You're a very interesting celestial spirit mage. Thanks. Lucy replied while blowing her golden key as if it were a smoking gun. Took me a month to get the speed of my forced closures and resums to this level. Now then, little angel. It's time I bring you down to earth. Lucy spun her Kusarigama chain and swung it into the air at Angel. But the white-haired girl merely flapped her wing attachments and avoided the attack before zeroing on Lucy. Angel magic. Feather storm. Angel brought her wings back before flapping them forward with great force. A rain of feathers flew forth from her wings, and the shining light reflecting off of them told Lucy that they should not make contact with her. Taurus. I. The celestial spirit stood in front of his summoner and twirled his axe rapidly to create a defensive wall of gold and steel. The clang of what sounded like steel on steel echoed through the air. A stray feather passed through the whirling axe's defense and underneath Taurus's armpit where it sliced apart Lucy's skin. The thin line leaked blood and Lucy glanced down in surprise. Raising her hand, she wiped away the crimson liquid. Hard enough to stand against Taurus's axe and yet sharp enough to slice against skin. Lucy glanced up at her fellow celestial spirit mage. She's much more dangerous than I thought. How dare you cut Lucy's beautiful, SXY body, Taurus snorted. The cost is 20. Angel suddenly whipped out 2 golden coins and kissed them before tossing them into the air. The 2 coins vanished in a flash of light before a massive stone angel appeared. The angel wore a tunic and had a curly-looking beard. Like Michael, Mjolnir was void of expression. A pair of small wings sprouted out of its shoulders. Its most notable feature was the massive stone hammer it held in its hands. Angel magic. Mjolnir the mighty. The massive hammer-wielding angel was easily twice the size of Taurus and thus the shadow formed easily encompassed the 2 grounded combatants. Mjolnir slammed down on the ground and immediately went to strike with its hammer. Lucy and Taurus leapt out of the way, but were sent skidding backwards from the force of the shockwave. Lucy quickly countered and lashed out with her kusarigama, leaping at the stone angel and slashed at its face. Sparks flew from the friction of the side blade against the stony skin of the angel, but Lucy quickly followed up by swinging her chain around. The chain wrapped around Mjolnir's neck and the weight slammed into the throat of the angel as it finished coiling around the angel's neck. A large crack formed there. The blonde pulled on the chain to bring Herschel before rearing back the side blade and brought it down strongly. "Here's steel in your eye," Lucy roared as she stabbed the kusarigama blade into the angel's eye. Mjolnir, being merely a stone statue, made no sort of reaction, but the eye of the gargantuan hammer wielder was now sporting a spiderweb of cracks as Lucy's blade impaled it. Removing the blade from its target, Lucy quickly undid her kusarigama from Mjolnir's neck and went to repeat the process to get at the angel's other eyes. Mjolnir would have none of it, however. The angel turned and then batted Lucy away with its hand, bruising her stomach beneath her clothes and knocking the wind out of her. The blonde was caught by her celestial spirit. "Thanks, Taurus. No problem. I will always be there to save your SXY body, Lucy." Mjolnir swung his hammer once more at the duo. Taurus quickly stepped in front of his summoner and blocked the strike with his axe while Lucy jumped and rolled out of the way. Taurus skidded along the ground and stabbed his axe into the ground to stop his movement. Mjolnir walked towards the massive bovine only for the giant angel to suddenly find its path being obstructed by Lucy. Lucy quickly wrapped the chain of her kusarigama around the angel's ankles. The angel attempted to walk forwards, but tripped due to being entangled in the chains. Mjolnir stumbled forwards, but quickly used its hammer to act as a support and prevent itself from falling. Lucy pulled her chain back towards her as her plan to trip the angel of rock failed. Said hammer-wielding summon suddenly raised its hammer and slammed it down on the ground. A massive shockwave sent Lucy off balance before Mjolnir lashed out with a strong kick. Lucy's brown eyes widened as blood and spittle were released from her mouth. She spiraled through the air and into a tree. The busty mage released a gasp of pain as the bark cracked and stabbed through her white shirt and marred her skin with splinters. She continued to cough as she aimed to retrieve the air she lost from her lungs. Taurus leapt at Mjolnir and slashed at it with his axe, but the hammer blocked the assaulting weapon. Mjolnir spun around and crashed its hammer down on Taurus, which sent the spirit into the ground. Swinging its hammer like a golf club, Mjolnir followed up with a powerful swing that sent Taurus rolling on the ground and through a tree. "Taurus!" Lucy quickly rose to her feet, wincing as she held her cracked ribs. She ran towards her celestial spirit and watched as Taurus rose back to his feet slowly. "Don't worry about me. We have to beat that thing, Lucy." Taurus mooed. Lucy gritted her teeth, looking at her physically strongest spirit before nodding stiffly. "Alright. Let's go with the 3-hit combo we practiced with Cancer and Virgo." Taurus chuckled and nodded. Taurus stamped his feet down before snorting. "For Lucy's boobs." Taurus mooed. Lucy followed after Taurus as he charged forward. The bipedal bull swung his axe while Mjolnir swung his hammer. Both weapons collided with great force, generating a shockwave that sent them both skidding backwards. As Taurus moved towards her due to his skidding motion, Lucy leapt into the air as Taurus stabbed his axe into the ground and grabbed her by the ankles. Taurus spun around and Lucy adjusted the grip on the chain of her kusarigama as she was thrown. She spun around as she neared the stone angel, the side blade of the kusarigama rotating with her. The buzzsaw tactic she had used during the Phantom Lord Guild War had resurfaced and was as deadly as ever. The side blade slashed at Mjolnir and Angel was actually in shock as her thick-skinned summon was now sporting numerous slash marks from the sharp weapon. Lucy then stopped spinning as she was now extremely close to her winged opponent and she slammed her feet against Mjolnir's stomach. She kicked off of the angel's body before Angel swooped down like a hawk upon its prey and slammed a fast-moving fist into her stomach. Lucy coughed up spittle and resisted the urge to vomit as she was sent to the ground. Angel magic. Feather storm. A storm of sharp, white feathers raced through the air towards Lucy, but Taurus quickly threw his axe at the incoming projectiles. The spinning dual-bladed weapon tore through the feathers and Angel, who was currently on the ground, leaned her body backwards so that her upper body was parallel to the ground. The axe narrowly passed over her head, saving her from what would have been either being decapitated or cut in half, before it slammed into Mjolnir's left arm, causing it to crumble. Angel gritted her teeth in anger before some forth more of her sharp feathers before Mjolnir lumbered forwards. Lucy was dodging left and right, performing every single acrobatic feat in the book and then some. She then came to a stop as she looked up with wide eyes as Mjolnir towered over her, its shadow encompassing her body. With its only arm, the winged statue raised its hammer and brought it down on Lucy. A mighty crash echoed through the wood sea and Angel grinned toothily with sadistic glee as she saw the dust cloud that formed from her adversary being crushed. Whack-a-mole. Eat your heart out. Angel smiled to herself. However, her dark eyes widened when the smoke cloud parted. There was no blood on the ground. Mjolnir, raise your hammer, she ordered. Mjolnir did as it was told and raised its hammer. Angel's eyes widened ever further as panic formed on her face. She turned when she heard Taurus chuckle before vanishing as golden light. Where Lucy had previously stood, where there should have been a bloody smear in Angel's opinion, there was a deep hole in the ground. Mjolnir then began to stumble as the earth began to quake and Angel knew the blonde was the cause of it all. Mjolnir, get out of the way. Her panic had overridden her basic common sense action to just call back her Angel, but it was too late to even commit to that action. The ground beneath Mjolnir's feet cracked before another large hole appeared. Out of the hole appeared a pink-haired beauty wearing a maid's outfit, chains dangling from her arms which were attached to said limbs by cuffs around her wrists. The green-eyed celestial spirit that was Virgo the Virgin reared back her fist. Sama demands you receive punishment time. Virgo spoke with a monotonous, robotic tone. A swift uppercut crashed against Mjolnir's chin before Virgo followed up by lashing out with her chains. The chains wrapped around Mjolnir's right arm and Virgo used her amazing strength to pull herself towards the stone angel and crash her feet harshly against the arm at the shoulder. Cracks raced their way down the limb before it was literally shattered. Skidding along the ground from the momentum of her attack, Virgo twisted around and used her chains once more to bind Mjolnir at the ankles like her summoner had once tried before. Lucy then leapt out of the hole in the ground and she whipped out another of her golden keys. Gate of the Crab, I open thee. Cancer. The sunglasses-wearing man appeared in a flash of golden light, scissors at the ready. Let's go Cancer, Lucy exclaimed. Cancer nodded. Let's go, Ebby. The cool-mannered spirit said. Both summoner and spirit then leapt into the air. Lucy holding her scythe blade while Cancer crossed his scissors in front of him. With Virgo's chains holding the stone giant in place, the winged statue could only stand there as the scythe and two pairs of extremely sharp scissors slashed at the cracked area of its neck. Lucy and Cancer landed on the ground before turning to see Mjolnir's head slide off of its body. The angel fell to the ground as rubble and light. Lucy panted heavily and nodded in thanks to her spirits. Good work guys, she said. We do what we can, Ebby, Cancer said as he snipped his scissors. Haircut now? You are too kind, Sama. Virgo bowed to her summoner. Is it punishment time now for me? She really was a glutton for punishment, literally. Lucy's sweat dropped at her spirit's words. She chose to ignore as she looked to her surprised opponent. That's two of your summons down. Angel, give it up, Lucy exclaimed to the airborne dark mage. Angel blinked before shaking her head as she processed Lucy's words. Angel then released a snort of amusement and began to chuckle. Her chuckles grew louder and louder, becoming full-blown laughter. She reared back her head as she wiped away a tear. Flapping her wings, she looked down at her now confused opponents. Oh you stupid light guild mages are always so confident every time you take down one or two opponents. Angel reached into her impressive cleavage and this time, she pulled out 4 golden coins. Oración Siete is not labeled as one of the top 3 dark guilds in Fury for nothing. Now tremble before the might of the gods. I am an angel and I will show you our power. Lucy and Cancer had their mouths agape in shock as they felt the burst of magic energy. Virgo remained stoic as she always was. The cost is 40. A flash of golden light followed by what sounded like an angelic choir was heard. Angel magic, Barakiel the Archangel. The golden light was then replaced by a bright white mixed with sky blue. While not as large as Mjolnir, Barakiel was indeed large, standing at suitably tall height of 12 feet. This angel had a more flesh-like appearance unlike its stony-like predecessors in combat. It looked like a female humanoid, bearing 3 faces, 2 large feathery wings and 2 large arms. The angel was clothed in a white dress. Like the light that surrounded it, Barakiel was colored entirely with white and light blue. Finish them. Show them the power of my prayer. The power to be angel. Angel yelled as she settled atop her Angel Summon's shoulder. Barakiel nodded and then directed all 3 pairs of eyes on Lucy and her 2 celestial spirits. The earth began to quake and then Barakiel's 3 faces opened their mouths. A beautiful sound, angelic even, echoed through the air and Barakiel's form shone brighter than before. Lucy could only stare in shock while Cancer and Virgo had leapt in front of their user to protect her from the brunt of the attack. A massive burst of light had exploded out of Barakiel. The dome of light-based magic energy continued along its destructive path before it vanished just as quickly as it came. Angel and Barakiel observed the destroyed landscape. The earth was torn asunder, scorched and ripped apart by the force of the attack. Crevices lay beneath the floating Angel's form. Trees had fallen, a significant amount being uprooted as well. Angel smirked in victory as she saw the remnants of the golden dust that signified the celestial spirits returning to their world. Beneath said dust was one pain-filled Lucy Heartfilia. Her skin was red, peeling in a few areas due to the heat and the first-degree burns she received from Barakiel's attack. She panted heavily, her chest heaving and her eyes shut tightly from the pain. She white clothes were covered in dirt and blood and torn to reveal a bit more leg and significant amount of cleavage. The blonde celestial spirit mage opened her eyes, her vision blurred due to having been nearly blinded by Barakiel's attack. Angel gave a grin of approval and stroked Barakiel's long, flowing hair. She then snapped her fingers and the 3-faced angel vanished from view. The Oracion Siete mage hovered in the air with her wings before she flew down, flapping her wings as she neared Lucy. She plucked a feather from the left wing and channeled a bit of magic energy into it so that it became as sharp and hard as a sword. However, she paused in her motion to kill the fairy tale mage as Brain's telepathic message filled her head. She sighed and ran her hand through her long white hair. "You're lucky that I have something more important to do, Light Guild mage. But listen to me very closely when I say this." Angel landed on the ground and bent down to Lucy's pained form. Her voice dropped to nothing but a whisper, her hot breath meeting the sensitive skin of Lucy's burned ear. "I let you live," and with that, she took off into the skies to go back to her guild's hideout. Insert music. Black Rock Shooter Battle of BRS Extended. Unknown area, Northern Wood Sea, fury blasts of orange, yellow and platinum flame scorched the air. Jagged arrows and lances of blue, and sometimes black, ice followed after the fiery attacks. Much to the annoyance of their users, the opponent they wished to take down had the uncanny ability to avoid every single one of their attacks as if he had some sort of precognitive ability. Cubelios's winged form carried its master, Cobra, atop her back. The purple-scaled serpent flapped its leathery wings, hissing as it literally snaked its way around every single strike. Natsu punched the air to send out a stream of orange-yellow flame and Urza accompanied the attack with her own. Slashing Caliburn's blazing visage, an arc of platinum-colored fire fused with Natsu's own attack. Cubelios quickly arched her body to go into a swift dive while Cobra ducked down, both Oracion Siete members avoiding the combined attack with ease. Ice Make. Geyser. Gray slammed his hands down on the ground and a massive tower of ice climbed into the sky, aiming to engulf the 2 Dark Guild members. With a hiss of defiance, Cubelios then began to spiral around the length ice spire that appeared beneath them before flapping her wings harshly to put on a boost of speed. Gray's eyes widened and quickly raised his arms to defend himself as the massive reptile slammed into him. Gray skidded backwards from the force, but was suddenly pulled back towards Cubelios as her tail wrapped around his right wrist. As he was pulled forward, Gray found himself now soaring through the air as Cobra had reared back his fist and crashed a powerful punch against his face. Gray spiraled towards a tree, but Natsu quickly appeared and caught his best friend. "Watch yourself, Snowcone," Natsu said. "Same could be said for you, Night Light," Gray replied as he nodded in thanks to Natsu before settling himself on the ground. Gray then clapped his hands together and a magic seal formed in front of him. A bow made entirely of black ice formed. 3 sharp, triangular-shaped arrows were already notched and ready to launch. Hyojin Maiku. Sasu Yona Aim. The piercing rain spell was launched and the 3 arrows sped through the air towards their target. "Light him up, Natsu," Gray ordered. Natsu nodded to his raven-haired guild mate before holding out both hands. Karyu no Kawan. The fire Dragonslayer sent off a stream of red-hot flames which accumulated into a massive spheroid of blazing destruction. Cobra and Cubelios watched as the ice arrows did not melt and were instead completely engulfed in flame. Unison Raid. Freezer Burn. Cobra's eyes widened as he heard the thoughts of his opponents, immediately learning the result of the combined spell. "Cubelios, up," the second-generation Dragonslayer commanded. The golden-eyed reptile hissed and flapped her wings harshly to gain the much-needed upward thrust. Cubelios swiftly rose above the trees and glanced down just in time to see the arrows impact with the earth they had been hovering over moments ago. There was a massive explosion of fire and then the flames began to split apart, breaking down into embers as the 3 arrows grew and became 3 large ice spikes that would have surely impaled Cobra and Cubelios. If they had managed to hit us with that, it would have caused a bit of trouble for us," Cobra muttered. His serpentine companion nodded in agreement. "At the least the trees provide us with some cover as well to provide with us with time to produce a counterattack. Let's—" Cobra didn't have the time finish his sentence as he watched as massive pillars of platinum flame erupted from the forest grounds below. Trees were reduced to nothing but ash, and scorched earth was what was left of the area. So much for the trees providing them with cover. Urza leapt into the air and shone with a golden light. Requip. Flame Empress armor. Clad in her 5th titania of fairy tail, flapped her wings to ascend towards Cobra. She swung Caliburn and unleashed a blast of platinum flame at him, but Cubelios flew over the attack. Urza used the attack as a distraction, however, and quickly put on a burst of speed to close the distance between them. Cobra had heard her thoughts, unfortunately, so the experimental Dragonslayer was capable of directing Cubelios to dodge to the right. The vertical chop from the Titania was avoided and Cobra smirked before pointing at her. Sound magic. Sound palm. A massive boom was heard as the sound barrier was broken, and suddenly Urza released an ear-splitting scream as all sound waves were directed at her. The first burst of sound struck her sword hand, and thus Caliburn was removed from her grip. The brown-eyed woman watched as her weapon was sent hurtling towards the scorched ground below. The second sound wave accumulation struck her soon after. The red-haired woman clutched her ears, hoping to block out the deafening sounds. Cubelios took her opponent's paws in the air as a chance to strike. And strike she did. The winged snake sped forth and lashed out with her tail, wrapping it around Urza's stomach area before flipping forwards, Cobra holding on tightly as she did so. After performing the flipping motion to build up the momentum, Cubelios hissed loudly and she released Urza. Cobra leapt off of Urza and fell after her. The force of the throw carried Urza all the way to the ground zero, and the ground caved inwards from the force of her collision. The small crater then grew a bit larger as Cobra forcefully slammed down, feet first, atop of Urza's armored form. Her brown eyes widened as she felt the air leave her stomach. Her ears were still ringing, and so her nauseated form was practically defenseless as Cobra got off of her and then slammed his hands on the ground. Sound magic. Sound burst. A burst of sound waves were directed at the 19-year-old, and she was sent soaring through the air at a high speed. Gray and Natsu quickly went to her aid and caught her in their arms. The momentum of her moving body caused the two males to skid back slightly before they rested Urza down on the ground. "You okay?" Gray asked. Urza shook her head to rid herself of the dizziness and rubbed her inner ear with a pinky. Once the sound, which appeared to be akin to that of the note of high C above the stave, the note of oncoming deafness, vanished from her ear canals, Urza turned to her two guildmates. "Let's kick his ass," she stated. Natsu and Gray nodded as they looked at their now grounded opponent. With his flying serpent flying high in the air, the brown-haired dark mage would only have 2 seconds to wait for Cubelios to reach him. The fairy tale mages were capable of moving at a much faster pace. Gray and Natsu went for a simultaneous punch to the face, but Cobra ducked underneath the strikes and grabbed their wrists before hurling them over his head. He then fell backwards, going into a backward roll to avoid the downward thrust from Urza. A violent explosion rocked the earth as Caliburn's fiery tip destroyed the ground where Cobra had once stood. Using the smoke to his advantage, Gray slammed his hands on the ground and a massive magic seal formed beneath his body. Ice make. Lance. Leaping out of the fire and smoke, Cobra quickly had to roll with his landing as multitude of blue ice lances flew through the air towards him. "I told you, I can hear everything that you all do," Cobra shouted to his opponents. The fairy tale mages didn't reply with words. Natsu ejected flames from his feet and shot forth at a high speed and lashed out with a rolling kick. Cobra grabbed the assaulting limb by the ankle and spun around, throwing Natsu away before sending a burst of sound waves after him. The son of Igniel tumbled through the air only to be caught by his female guildmate. Urza spun around and used her momentum combined with Natsu's to send the rosette flying straight back towards Cobra. Karyu no Kenkaku. Natsu's body became engulfed in orange-yellow flames. Cobra smirked, but his eyes widened as he heard Gray's thoughts. He backpedaled as 2 small spires of ice sprung up where his legs would have been. The Ice Godslayer had planned to encase his feet in ice and prevent him from moving. Cobra then leaned backwards, so his body was now parallel to the ground so as to avoid Natsu's strike. However, Cobra was caught off guard when Urza decided to run behind Natsu's soaring form. The blazing Dragonslayer was now directly over the dark mage, and that was when Urza leapt into the air. The wielder of Caliburn slammed down on Natsu's back and began to exert a downward force on his body. Cobra was about to try an evasive maneuver, but his eyes widened when he found a cold sensation spread across his body. Glancing down at the ground, Cobra found a hand of black ice gripping his bent upper body. He followed the arm of ice, which had a thin trail leading back to Gray, who stood off to the side with a teasing smirk on his face. The Ice Godslayer gave off a wink to the sound magic user. "Gotcha!" was the simultaneous cry from all 3 fairy tale mages. Urza pushed off of Natsu's back to launch herself back into the air while Natsu was forced downwards. The son of Igneel crashed down on Cobra with terrific force and a massive explosion ensued. Smoke and fire billowed from the crater in the ground. Gray dusted his hands as if he had just taken out the trash. The wings on Urza's Fire Empress armor flapped lightly as she kept herself aloft. The fire and smoke continued to rise, but it was then that they realized something was wrong. The explosion hadn't been resounding. There was some sound, but it wasn't as loud as they knew it would have been. Natsu always made possibly deafening explosions with his attacks. True, the fire and smoke had formed. The earth was definitely showing that the explosive force of Natsu's attack had been issued, but in the end, there was no high-level sound. Then the scream came. Shit. Both Gray and Urza exclaimed. Urza flapped her wings harshly and the smoke cloud parted along with the colorful embers. Rather than Natsu standing over Cobra, the snake charmer was now standing over Natsu. Cobra had lost the entirety of the left side of his cloak from the neckline to the waist. His left chest and arm were bare and sporting a few painful-looking burns which were covered in dirt and dust. The second-generation Dragonslayer grinned maliciously as he raised his right foot and slammed it down harshly on Natsu's back. The Rosette was lying unconscious on the ground. At first glance he looked relatively untouched, minus the boot slamming repeatedly against his spine, but upon closer inspection they could see the twitches from Natsu's ear muscles. "What did you do to him, Cobra?" Urza roared with rage. She twitched her wrist and Caliburn's flames burned much brighter. Even Cobra began to feel the heat waves which rolled off of the legendary blade of Merlin. However, the mere temperature increase did little to reduce the size of Cobra's toothy grin. A little spell called Sound Magic. Reflection. Cobra informed his two remaining opponents. In an explosion, sound waves travel outwards from their point of origin through the atmosphere. Basic physics states that sounds are a sequence of waves of pressure which travel through a compressible medium, that is, air or water, and are propagates in said media. Waves, especially sound and light, can be manipulated via reflection, refraction or attenuation during the propagation process. Cobra then pointed to his ears. The sound waves that travel through the atmosphere are picked up by the small hair follicles in our inner ears and are heard at certain decibels. If the sound waves are dangerously high, it can damage the inner ear and possibly lead to deafness. Using the aforementioned spell, I reflected the sound waves during the propagation and redirected them so that they were directed at the brat here. "You deafened him?" Gray snarled at the Dragubra shrugged. "He's a Dragonslayer, right? He's got sensitive hearing so it's a possibility, but the lowest case scenario would be that he would have a ringing in his ears over quite a bit of time. A few hours for the least." The Oracion Siete mage snapped his fingers and then blasts of sound raced through the atmosphere and slammed into both fairy tale mages. Gray crashed into a tree while Urza was grounded by the strike. "Now then, let's see how you guys will fare." Cobra chuckled darkly, however he paused in his movement. A deep frown replaced his fanged grin and he kicked Natsu's downed form in frustration. "Damn it, and just as I was about to utterly crush you guys. Where are you going?" Urza called out as she and Gray climbed to their feet. Cobra hopped into the air and landed atop Cubelios as the winged serpent swooped down to carry off its master. "Master Brain has called for us. We were merely to serve as a method of distraction while we aim for our real target, Little Miss Sky Dragonslayer." "Wendy, that's right. And now that we have the healing prowess of the Sky Dragon on our side, there will be no stopping us from activating the ultimate magic that is Nirvana. See you around, brats." And with that Cubelios flapped her wings harshly and took off at a high speed. Urza couldn't fly that fast and her flight armor definitely wouldn't be able to match that kind of speed, especially in the damaged condition she was in right now. Sound waves made a much greater impact on the inner body despite leaving no visible wounds. Her nausea and ringing ears were not to be overlooked. The same could be said for Gray. The two then stumbled over to Natsu and knelt down beside him. Urza flipped him over and patted his cheek lightly. She began to pat it a bit harder when she got no response for her efforts. After a minute, the Rosette clenched his eyes as he began to stir. The amber eyes of the Fire Dragonslayer slowly revealed themselves and said Son of Igneel raised himself into a sitting position. "Natsu." Urza wrapped the boy in a hug before releasing him. "Are you okay?" Natsu stared in confusion at Urza. "What?" he exclaimed loudly. Gray and Urza covered their ears. Even though the ringing from Cobra's attacks was already beginning to die down, the fact remained that their eardrums were still a bit sensitive to loud sounds. "Oi, Firebrand," Gray flicked Natsu on the forehead. "You don't have to fucking yell, we're right next to you." "What?" Gray gritted his teeth and dragged his hand down his face. This guy." Gray and Urza began to shout at him, but to Natsu all he could do was see his two friends' mouths move while the sound of high C filled his ears. Urza stared at Natsu for a while and noticed the Rosette was staring at them awkwardly. Urza noticed the reddened look on Natsu's ears and her eyes narrowed. She raised her hand as the rosette focused his attention on the ice god slayer before snapping her fingers by his ear. Her brown eyes widened when Natsu made no response. She snapped her fingers twice more, still no reaction. "No way!" she gasped out. She grabbed Natsu by the shoulders and forced him to direct his attention at her. The son of Igneel raised an eyebrow in confusion as he saw Urza staring at him with tears lining her non-prosthetic eye. Natsu turned to Gray and then back at Urza before pointing at his ears and shaking his head. Urza and Gray looked at each other, their eyes wide with shock as they looked to their trademark Dragonslayer. The realization had struck them, and it struck them hard. Natsu had gone deaf. Insert music. Code Geass lack of power for wisdom. Unknown area, Northern Wood Sea, Fury. A large swirl-shaped wound had blood flowing from it. The magic energy and wind had sliced into the flesh and shredded it, and because of his inability to understand the severity of the situation when combating a Dragonslayer, he paid the price. Now laying in a crater with his own flesh and blood decorating the earth, he had been utterly defeated by his opponent. His body shuddered lightly as Wendy Marvel, daughter of Grandine the Sky Dragon and Sky Dragonslayer, stamped her foot down on the head of her fallen opponent. Racer lay unconscious beneath her feet, and the blue-haired Dragonslayer panted heavily in exertion, but the toothy grin that was on her face never failed to show her pride and joy. I did it, Naruto Oni-san," she muttered to herself. She then looked up and smiled as she saw Charles descending from the skies above. The winged exceed flew down with tears of joy in her brown eyes. "Wendy," said Sky Dragonslayer, released an amusing oof as Charles slammed into her, hugging the side of her face tightly. The blue-haired preteen chuckled at her feline companion as she settled down atop her head. "I knew you could do it, Wendy." Charles smiled at her partner, wiping away her tears. "Sometimes I forget that you're really strong due to your young age." Wendy's chest puffed out with pride at the white-furred cat's words. "I beat them." The Sky Dragonslayer stared down at her unconscious opponent and looked at her clawed nails. Her Oni-san's ferocity was legendary in her mind. He took on all 6 of them with Kurama and managed to emerge victorious against them all. The blonde wind user and the almighty Kitsune were truly masters in the art of battle, and they were not afraid to kill. Wendy gulped audibly as she looked down at Racer's form. Could she really do it? Could she really swallow her fear and hesitation and actually kill a person? "My magic has always been to primarily support and heal those who are in need of it," the blue-haired girl thought. "If I could end this man's life, this mage who tried to take me away and possibly kill me, then I would be safe for a while. I could actually show that I'm not afraid, that I am strong like Oni-san." Wendy raised her leg that she had placed atop of the Oracion Siete mage's skull. She reared her arm back and the wind swirled to life around her fist. The Tenryu no Tekken was already created, and Wendy's brown eyes zeroed in on her opponent. She gulped audibly, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I can do this. I can do this," she muttered to herself. She repeated the mantra over and over to herself, the winds whipping wildly around her arm as she prepared to strike. "I can do this. I can do this." The volume of her cries got louder as the air currents bent to her will and spiraled at an even faster pace. With a roar, Wendy struck forth. Her arm descended at a breakneck pace towards the unconscious speed magic user. Her teeth were gritting harshly against each other. Her pupils were vertical to show her seriousness as she chose to follow her draconian side, but even as she went to kill Racer, her mind continuously raced. Could she actually do it? Was she strong enough? What would happen to her opponent? What would happen to her? Can she be like her Oni-san and Kurama-chan? She could kill him very easily. The power in her incoming strike would be enough to shatter the skull, shred the brain into mere mush, and leave nothing but a bloody smear instead of a head resting atop the body's shoulders. She could finally say she had killed someone. However, her wind-covered fist halted just above Racer's head. The winds ruffled his black and blonde hair, and Wendy's eyes shifted from side to side as her mind finally caught up with her body and her eyes widened in realization. She could have killed Racer. She could have made her Oni-san proud of her by actually taking a life, but then where would that get me? She began voicing her thoughts. Oni-san is a great fighter and kills because he was trained to do so. He's used to it. But me? I don't think I can do that. Oni-san, do you think I would be seen as weak in your eyes and I were to not mimic you all the time? She tilted her head to sky, hoping that the heavens would provide her with an answer. The wind blew gently, rustling the leaves in the trees of the wood sea. The brown-eyed Dragonslayer looked back down at the unconscious Racer. "I'm sorry, Oni-san, but I'm not like you. I'm not ruthless, I'm not all-powerful, I'm not capable of keeping my emotions tied down. I'm not you." She gave a sad smile and rested herself on her knees. "You are your own person, Oni-san, and so am I. Dragonslayers is what we are. But I cannot take the life of a human being. Master Rubel always told me that it takes a great deal of strength to take a life and to even save a life. But it takes even greater strength to know when to do so. So Master Rubel. Naruto Oni-san. Kurama-chan. And Ka-chan. I hope I made the right decision in letting this man live, as I believe that he should not be killed. Not yet. Wendy rose up from her resting position and dusted the dirt and whatever loose particles of matter were on her clothing. I'm proud of you, Wendy. Charles spoke. Wendy raised a curious eyebrow at the brown-eyed cat. Charles, why didn't you even try to stop me? Wendy asked. I could have killed a man. Like I told you when we first met, I'm merely your partner. I'm your temporary guardian until we find that Oni-san of yours, but you've always made your decisions on your own. Dragon pride and all that jazz after all. Charles smirked as Wendy poked her fingers in embarrassment at how Charles spoke of her high level of pride. Wendy, I will support you in whatever you choose to do, but choices like the one you just made. Life and death are delicate no matter what side of the scale they rest on. I can't control you when you want to choose to take or preserve a life. Charles explained. So again, I'm proud of you for choosing to spare the dark mage. Charles glanced down at Racer's pain-filled form. But if he wakes up again and tries to kill us again, I will slap you. Wendy's sweat dropped. Charles always was a tough nut, or cat in this context. Now to find the others. The Sky Dragonslayer nodded in agreement and tilted her head back and sniffed the air. She paused as she detected a strange scent, her eyebrow raising in confusion. Then the killing intent came. Insert music. Naruto, a crisis after another. Her brown eyes widened when she felt the presence of the dark magic energy behind her. She quickly backflipped into the air and avoided the attack, but the blast of green and black magic produced a shockwave that sent her soaring through the air. She quickly rolled on the ground as she landed and used the momentum to bring herself back to her feet. However, as she did so, the towering figure before her raised his staff and brought it down. The skull-topped staff broke the ground and Wendy's eyes widened as she saw the master of Oracion Siete standing before her with a wide, sadistic grin. You are coming with me, Sky Dragonslayer. He spoke as if it were a fact. Like hell I will. Wendy looked over her much larger opponent. Brain definitely looked like how he did in his picture, but she noticed that one of the dark lines on his dark-skinned face was missing. Also, he seemed to be a lot more insane looking. His mouth had been twisted into a toothy grin that just screamed oncoming insanity and his eyes held a crazed look in them as if said insanity had already set in. Charles, go find the others. Tell them what happened, Wendy said. Charlie's eyes widened before seeing the serious look in her Dragonslayer partner's eyes. Charles gulped audibly before nodding. In a flash of magic energy, a pair of white feathered wings sprouted forth from Charlie's back and the former citizen of Edalis tore through the skies to go look for other members of the Light Guild Alliance for backup. Brain spun around and aimed an open palm at the fast-moving Exceed, but as the dark energy blast was fired, Wendy appeared out of thin air and kicked the dark mage against his arm. The attack veered off course and slammed into a tree which resulted in a small explosion followed by the sounds of large pieces of vegetation crashing into the ground. Wendy quickly leapt away as Brain glared at her. His eyes suddenly flashed crimson. Brain took off from his spot, the ground caving inwards from the force of his push-off and a small crater was created. Wendy quickly reacted as she watched Brain bring down his staff upon her skull. The Sky Dragonslayer quickly twisted to the side to avoid the strike before calling upon her abilities. Wendy vanished into the wind as she utilized her impressive speed and a medium-sized crater lay beneath the guild master's feet from where his attack had landed. His dark eyes remained there blood red before he felt a sudden spike in magic energy. Arms. Wendy called out. Brain quickly wrenched his staff from the ground and twirled it in his fingers before gripping the length of the weapon tightly. He spun around quickly and swung the staff and a powerful shockwave raced through the air as Wendy's fast-moving leg collided with the weapon. Wendy gritted her teeth before pushing off of the staff and vanished into the wind again. She then appeared on the ground and utilized her magic. Vernier. A sonic boom was all that was left of her as she took off. She moved too quickly for Brain to even think of trying to intercept her. She left small craters in the ground from where she pivoted and changed directions or angles of her movement. Finally, after believing her opponent had been confused enough, she sped towards her adversary and reared back her fist. Tenryu no. She didn't get to finish her proclamation as what she saw completely surprised her. Did you not know that sneaking up on people is extremely rude? Wendy's eyes widened as she saw the source of the voice. Let me teach you some manners, Claudoa. The talking skull staff suddenly spun around in Brain's hands without any sort of assistance from his holder. The eye holes and the green orb in his mouth glowed with an eerie green and black light and Wendy realized she was stuck. She was moving much too fast to stop and she was already in mid-strike leaving her completely defenseless against the energy-based attack. She was caught completely off guard by this turn of events. Darkness magic. Dark Caprico. The blasts of dual-colored magic energy shot forth from the three sources on Claudoa. The two eye beams struck her in the chest while the one that was fired from the lacrima in his jaws had made a powerful impact with her stomach. The Sky Dragonslayer released a painful cry that was music to the white-haired man's ears. The Dark Guild Master chuckled darkly as he spun around, and that chuckle became a bit louder as he heard the sound of Wendy impacting with the trunk of a tree. As he casually held Cladoa, the Master of Oracion Siete looked to see Wendy laying at the base of the tree she had slammed into. The bark from where her body had made impact with the piece of vegetation was broken and had caved inwards from the force, leaving a small imprint. Brain walked forward, twirling Cladoa with disgusting glee. "Excellent aim, Cladoa. Your words are very kind, Master Brain." The feather-wearing skull replied with a small nod. Neither mage nor skull made any sort of acknowledgement to the downed racer, and Brain even went so far as to actually step on his beaten subordinate's body. Bones crunched and Racer released a tired grunt of pain as his radius was cracked by Brain's boot. Brain then picked up Wendy and smirked to himself. "At last, I have you now. Master Brain, if you would be so kind as to explain why you decided to come after the Sky Dragonslayer by yourself, it would be greatly appreciated," Cladoa said. "Surely you could have had one of the other Oracion members pick her up after handling their respective opponents." "It is precisely for that reason that I came to get her by myself, Cladoa," the Balam Alliance member replied. "Knowing my subordinates, they sometimes tend to want to play with their food. I would allow this should it be any other day, but this sort of situation does not require me to have as much patience as I usually tend to have." He tapped Cladoa on the ground and the staff responded to its master's wishes, and suddenly a dark portal, a corridor OL, sprung up out of the shadows of the wood sea. Finally, Brain raised his prize and placed her on his shoulder as if she were nothing more than a sack of rice. The Master of Oracion Siete tapped his forehead and released a restrained grunt of pain. His crimson eyes flickered before settling on their original black. Brain then clapped his hands together against his cheeks to wake himself up from whatever tiredness he was feeling before tapping his forehead. "Angel, Cobra, Hot Eye and Zabrak, return to the base. I have found our prize, and also, one of you should go and get midnight before returning to our hideout. Sometimes sleeping all the time had its cons." Brain removed his fingers from his forehead, cutting off the telepathy magic he possessed before adjusted Wendy's form on his shoulder. "Time to awaken Nirvana. Insert music, Fairy Tale Guild Darkness. Oracion Siete HQ, Wood Sea, Fury Drip. Drip, drip." By the dragons, that sound was annoying. Groaning, Wendy stirred before opening her eyes. The chocolate-colored orbs widened sharply before she quickly rose into a sitting position. She looked up and around the area she was in. It was dark enough that she knew unless she had some sort of light source, she wouldn't be navigating around wherever the hell she was anytime soon. But there was enough light in the area from the scattered torches in her area that she knew she was in some sort of cave complex, a holding area or prison cell-like area to be specific. Rubbing her aching skull, the daughter of Grandine rose to her feet. She dusted off her cloak and skirt before tasting the air. She coughed violently. "By the dragons, that tasted horrible," she muttered to herself. She looked in front of her to see the iron door before her. With a growl she sped towards it and lashed out with a straight kick. A resounding clang echoed through the confined space and she forced to cover her ears due to her enhanced senses. She looked back to the iron door and frowned when she merely saw a foot-shaped dent in it. However, she blinked in surprise when the door creaked open. She was just about to speed off and make a break for it, but immediately came to a halt when she saw the 7-foot-tall giant that blocked the entirety of the door space. "Come with me," Zabrak spoke with his distorted voice. "The master wishes for you to come to see him." "Yeah, well, tell your master to go take that staff he carries around with him all the time and to go foo. I've already told him that numerous times," Zabrak replied instantly. Wendy raised an eyebrow at the silver-eyed mage. The muscle-bound man was definitely powerful, she could feel that was certain. However, the way he just responded to her comment just now made her aware of the displeasure he felt towards his master. "Now then, Wendy Marvell, please come with me." Wendy stared at the much taller mage with an obvious look of distrust. His large frame and the fact that he was undoubtedly stronger than her showed that she had little choice in choosing the path of most resistance. With a sigh, the blue-haired preteen nodded and she walked forwards. Zabrak nodded to her and so led her down the dark corridors of the Oracion Siete cave complex. As the two walked, Zabrak glanced back at the iron door and gave a chuckle as he saw the noticeable protrusion of metal from where Wendy's kick had made contact. "I knew Dragonslayers were strong, but for a young female such as yourself, to make such an impact on an iron door of that size and thickness is quite a feat," Zabrak said. "Impressive." Wendy held her head a bit higher from the praise and nodded in thanks. "Yup. I've been training ever since I was 6. She then looked up at the massive mage in front of her with a confused look. "Who are you?" "I beg your pardon? The Magic Council has no information on you. You're only registered as a mage with powers equal to or greater than that of your master, Brain, and that you are a giant of a man. Both of which I can see are very true." "Actually, the latter description of your first point describes me much better," Zabrak replied. "My powers are much greater than that of the man I begrudgingly call master. Brain is nothing more than a figurehead. As for who I am, Well, seeing as how once your usefulness has expired that you will most likely be killed, something I will not like to see truthfully, I will tell you me name. My name is Zabrak Granful. I see, Wendy replied. Zabrak-san? Yes, child? Urza-san told me that during her time in the Tower of Heaven, you were one of the few who tried to escape with great tenacity. Were you aware of their nickname of Hellspawn for you? Wendy asked innocently. Zabrak chuckled, his distorted voice making the show of amusement sound very peculiar. Oh, that is a title I have not been referred to in quite some time. Here, I am either Zabrak or Titan of Oracion, but Hellspawn. That really takes me back. I believe it was just after I bit off a guard's face that I was given that moniker. Why, you really did that? Wendy stuttered in shock. Yes, I did. Zabrak replied with a monotone. The man was suddenly appearing to be more terrifying with each passing step now that Wendy heard the words of confirmation over his actions from his own mouth. To bite off a man's face was truly a monstrous thing to do, but having heard tales of the Tower of Heaven from Master Rubol, Wendy was able to see his actions as justifiable. But sheesh, biting off a guy's face was really hardcore. A moment of silence passed between the two as they rounded a corner in the dark hallways of the guild headquarters. It was then that Wendy began to take notice of the fact that the rocky walls were beginning to take on a much more refined look, becoming smoother. The main halls begin from this point onwards. Wendy jumped at the sudden voice and instinctively lashed out with a kick. However, her leg froze when she slammed it against Zabrak's muscular back. His hard muscle accompanied with his iron-hard skin made her very much aware of his invulnerability and strength. Ow! She hissed, rubbing her aching leg. Your reflexes are impressive. However, striking me was a mistake on your part. Now let us move along. Wendy merely limped along behind the masked dark mage. It was as they were walking that Wendy remembered something Zabrak had said earlier. Zabrak-san, earlier, you said that once my usefulness to your guild had run its course that I would most likely be killed. Her feeling of curiosity grew a bit when she saw the light clenching of his hands into fists upon saying that. Why is it that you followed that with saying that you wouldn't like to see me be killed? Zabrak stopped walking. Due to him not facing her, she couldn't see the saddened look on the former slave's face. The silver-eyed giant sighed deeply. Young Wendy, as you know, I have led a harsh life in that tower. I was a child myself when I was first taken to that wretched spire from hell, and I also saw many others, children younger, the same ages and or older than me, die within it. The death of those who have yet to live a full life does not exactly appeal to me, so if I can, I wish to try to prevent that from happening. Zabrak glanced back at his guild's captive. I was also the one who talked down to Master Brain about restraining you in chains. Really? Wendy had been wondering why she wasn't bound or restrained in any way a few minutes ago as she was walking with the giant mage. Then Zabrak-san, I thank you for stopping them and for looking after my well-being. I did not do it for you. Do not make that mistake, child. Zabrak replied sharply. Wendy gulped as she felt the small pulse of killing intent. Chains are not meant to bind those who do not need restraining. That is reserved only for the wicked and for beasts. I see. Well, Zabrak-san, is it alright of me to ask of you to be my protector while in here? Zabrak's eyes widened at her words. Flashback Tower of Heaven, Fiorian Sea, year X 771. Zabrak stood before the child W dead guard and its beast lay dead at his feet and his teeth were bared, the blood and flesh of both man and beast dripping from his mouth. His lips were stretched to form a calming smile, but that did little to ease the younger slave's fear. There's no need to be afraid, the 8-year-old Zabrak said. He observed the younger slave. She was a pretty little girl with long dark purple hair and wide black eyes. Dressed in a tattered rag that could only be described as a makeshift dress, Zabrak frowned as he noticed the bloodlines from the whip lashings on her legs. I will protect you. Don't worry. In this hell, I will be your guardian angel, okay? Zabrak's bloody smile seemed less terrifying to her as she heard his words. Her wide black eyes grew even wider as she took note of the sincerity in his dialogue. Really? Zabrak nodded and pounded a fist on his chest. I promise you, I'll be your protector. End flashback. I wonder if she made it out of the tower during Urza Scarlet's rebellion all those years ago, he thought. Oksan? Zabrak-san. Zabrak shook his head and glanced back, his silver eyes meeting Wendy's brown ones. What? Why you stopped walking? She informed him with a bit of timidity. And you never answered my question either. Zabrak just stared at the young Dragonslayer before turning back to face the front. He continued to navigate along the winding pathways that stretched throughout the cave complex that the Oracion Siete called home. All forms of conversation had ended and Wendy gulped audibly as she began to feel the strong magical signatures coming from up ahead. Wendy blinked as she found herself in a sizable room, if she could call it that. It was merely a very spacious rocky area. Stalactites and stalagmites filled the corners of the room. The walls were made of smooth brown stone where there were large, glowing, violet runes spread out all over said walls. Possibly protective runes, the Sky Dragonslayer thought. Insert music. Fairy tale Tower of Heaven. She then poked her head from behind Zabrak and caught the sights of the other members of Oracion Siete. Standing before her were Angel, Cobra, Hot Eye and Brain. Cladoa was being spun lazily in the Oracion Siete master's hands while Midnight remained hovering on his rug, his eyes still closed as he was sleeping. Good, Zabrak, you have brought the girl. Zabrak nodded as he shifted to the side and Wendy took a few tentative steps forward. Her brown eyes glanced around the room, carefully taking in every detail of her enemies in the area. Now that we are all here, we can begin. Brain said as he stopped spinning Cladoa, slamming the skull staff on the ground with a resounding clack. Actually, Master. Hot Eye spoke. Racer is not present here yet. Racer will not be joining us, nor would I have let him should he have tried to do so. Why, Master? Angel asked. Why don't you ask our guest what happened to young Racer? Brain replied, making a gesture to the blue-haired girl. You mean the slowpoke? Wendy spoke. The black-clad girl bared her sharp canines and her pupils became vertical slits. Her snarl became a grin that would have made her brother figure proud. I stomped his ass into the ground is what happened. Zabrak released a chuckle while the other members, Signs Brain, Cladoa and Midnight, all glared at the preteen girl. The girl certainly had attitude when she wanted to show it. Why you little bitch, how dare you do that to Racer? Angel cried out. I could do the same to you if you want. Wendy replied with a sickeningly sweet tone. The air in the room bent to her will and swirling air currents burst to life. However, a pulse of powerful magic energy raced through the area. The foul sense of death and dread that came from the energy was more than enough to quell the bloodlust from the two females. You can go and kill her after she completes her project. Brain said. Raising Cladoa, the staff suddenly glowed with magic power. Crashing the bone-white weapon on the ground, the sentient object's eyes released a black and green glow before a corridor of darkness sprung forth in front of Brain. The master of Oracion Siete then snapped his fingers and the corridor vanished. All members of the Dark Guild, other than Brain and Cladoa, looked at the object that lay in the corridor of darkness's former location. A large black coffin stood with gold lining the lid. The object was wrapped tightly in chains. Brain walked up to the coffin and motioned to Zabrak and Wendy. The two walked forwards, Zabrak taking the lead as he went up to the coffin and broke off the steel chains. The chains fell to the ground and Zabrak took a few steps back as the coffin's lid fell away. Looking down at the ground where the lid and chains lay, Zabrak and Wendy allowed their eyes to climb up. Their eyes widened when they saw what lay within the coffin. Its contents were definitely not what either of them, nor the other members of the Oracion Siete, were expecting to see. A young, pale-skinned, and very much unconscious, man whose body was clad in tattered clothes. Said clothing consisted of a black tunic and a pair of black pants whose legs were tucked into a pair of black boots. The man's visible skin, that being mostly his arms and face, were covered in what looked to be random sheets of a thick crystalline substance. The substance shone like aquamarine, but it obviously wasn't the precious stone as there was a high magic energy concentration coming from the rocky substance. His body was shown to be wrapped in steel chains akin to the ones which held his coffin's lid before. The man's most distinguishable feature was the odd red tattoo that stretched vertically across the man's closed right eye. Zabrak's silver eyes glowed with power and the earth rumbled as his magic energy and killer intent flared. With a seemingly bestial roar, Zabrak charged towards the man that ruined his life, the man that made him and many others return to the life of labor, the man that denied many the freedom they so righteously deserved. That blue-haired bastard. Jellal, over the wood sea, skies of fury. Naruto and Kurama hovered over the great expanse of vegetation that was the wood sea. They looked over the sea of green. Kurama yawned while stretching like the cat he was. Oh, we've arrived. Kurama stated. Can I return my seat to its upright position now? Shut up, you mangy cat. Naruto muttered. So, what's our plan? Do you even remember where the Cage Shelter Guild is? Kurama asked. Rubel could have moved it or something. Highly unlikely. He is the only person aside from Wendy who lives within this. What's that? Naruto raised an eyebrow as he noticed something flying through the air at a high speed. Kurama followed Naruto's line of sight and also noticed the object which was flying through the air in a panicked manner. Judging from its flight pattern, I'd say the being is much too fast to be some sort of bird. It's also much too large, Kurama added. Kurama narrowed his eyes as he focused more intently on the object before them. A few moments later, his eyes widened when he realized what the being was. Leaping off of Naruto's head, Kurama sprouted his wings in a burst of magic before flying towards the being. Naruto raised a perplexed eyebrow and followed after his kitsune-like partner. The duo neared the being and the being suddenly paused in the air. It then zoomed towards them at a rather quick pace. Kurama quickly reacted and caught the being, which upon closer inspection, was revealed to be a white-furred exceed. So I was right. You're an exceed. Kurama spoke. The winged cat before him wore a panicked expression and Kurama's red eyes stared into her own brown ones. Insert music. Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood anticipation. The thing. In the trees. The booms, explosions. Fighting. Almost dead. Need help, the Exceed gasped out. Whoa there, calm down. Kurama gripped his fellow Exceed's shoulders. Charles gasped and panted, her hyperventilating wasn't problem either. But dark mages. Light Guild Alliance. Calm down, girl. Take a deep breath. Charles took a deep breath and managed to gain enough oxygen to calm herself down. And exhale. She breathed out. Kurama nodded stiffly. Better? Charles nodded. Thank you. None needed. He replied. Now tell me, what's going on? You said you were from the Light Guild Alliance. Naruto stated. Which guild do you hail from? Kate Shelter. Charles replied quickly. Now listen, it was nice chatting, but I need to get to the other alliance members. My partner is in danger and I need to go. Charles flapped her wings as began to take off. Stop, Naruto exclaimed. Charles froze at the commanding tone of voice from the blonde human before her. You said Kate Shelter, correct? Charles nodded. Then your partner. Is it? Naruto gritted his teeth. Is it Wendy? Wendy Marvel? Charlie's eyes widened as her chocolate brown irises met the sapphire blue ones of the Apocalypse Dragonslayer. She nodded her head slowly. Yes. How did you know that? Charles, my name is Naruto. Naruto? Charles tilted her head in confusion. After a few moments, her eyes widened in realization. Wait, you mean the Naruto? As in Naruto Oni-san? The one who taught Wendy practically everything she knows? Well, we wouldn't say everything. I taught her some stuff too, Kurama said. Charles turned to Kurama, but before she could speak, Naruto twisted her head back to face his. Ignore the cat. Naruto rolled his eyes. And to answer your previous questions, yes to all of them. I am Naruto. I am her teacher, surrogate older brother and the one who raised her to become the strong Dragonslayer I am sure she is now. Now, Charles, I need you to forget about those Light Guild Alliance members and focus on myself and Kurama alone. Kurama gave a small wave of his paw at being mentioned. But, no buts, no ifs, no ands, understood? You will report to me, and me alone as of now, everything that has happened so far. Naruto's eyes flashed to white and he growled dangerously at the Exceed before him. Charles remained silent out of the fear she felt right now. I said him I understood, Charles of Kate Shelter? He roared. AI. Charles stuttered. Naruto's eyes never lost their fear-inducing white glow as Charles continued to stare into them. Charles shuddered before audibly gulping down the lump of fear that had formed in her throat. Naruto then nodded to her before straightening himself out as he glanced down at the small Exceed. Naruto crossed his arms in front of his chest and curled his lips upwards, baring his sharp canines. Now tell me, what has become of my baby sister? Northern would see, fury. She was what? Naruto roared. Kurama hovered between Naruto and Charles. The white-furred Exceed trembled in fear as she felt the killing intent from the Apocalypse Dragonslayer. She was taken by Orochimaru Siede's leader, Brain. She gulped audibly as Naruto gnashed his sharp teeth. I'm not strong. I'm practically useless in combat so there was literally nothing I could do to stop him. Wendy told me to go find the others and tell them what happened. Naruto was about to snap, but a tight grip found its way to his shoulder. His head snapped to his left where he saw his fox-costumed Exceed partner. What? Crimson eyes met his shining white ones. Calm down, Naruto. Kurama said. Calm down? You want me to calm the fuck down? Naruto pointed at Charles. My Udo has been taken by dark mages because this little shit couldn't do one thing to stop it and you expect to fucking stay calm? Naruto's chest heaved as he had pretty much yelled out that entire sentence in one breath. Kurama merely nodded his head. That's right. I'm just as pissed off as you, believe me, I am. But Exceed aren't built for combat. Not like us 9. Your anger is misplaced here, Naruto. Kurama patted Naruto on the head. Focus on the situation at hand. Naruto clenched his hands into tight fists before taking a deep breath. After he exhaled, his white eyes lost their brilliant shine and died down to reveal their original blue color. Adjusting his face mask, the blonde Dragonslayer turned back to face Charles. You're right, Kurama. Naruto nodded to the companion of Wendy. My anger is truly misplaced in this situation. My care for my little sister tends to get the best of me at times. It's okay, Charles said as she tried to calm her rapidly beating heart. The blonde was really scary when he got mad. So, tell me, Charles. What are the events that occurred prior to my arrival? What happened before my Udo was captured? From the beginning or from when we encountered Orochimaru? Charles asked, seeking clarification. From your meeting with Orochimaru would be most beneficial in my opinion. Naruto replied. Anything prior to your encounter would be insignificant due to the fact that it would be most likely you light guilds introducing yourselves, being given the information on the Orochimaru Siete members and discussing your battle plans on how to defeat them. Alright. Charles nodded her head. She took a few deep breaths to calm her still fast-beating heart, and once it decreased to a suitable level, she began her explanation. Well, we met up, or rather, we were ambushed by the Oración Siete members during our navigation process through these northern areas of the Wood Sea. The magic bomber, Christina, used by Blue Pegasus had been shot down, and then they split us up. Cobra took Grave Fullbuster, Natsu Dragneel and Urza Scarlet on, Angel chose to combat Lucy Heartfilia, Lamina Scale members confronted Midnight, and that unknown giant mage had attacked Blue Pegasus. Wendy had chosen to take on Racer when she was tackled into the trees. Charles pointed in a little ways east. She ended up by that area, a few kilometers east from where we are. She and Racer started from about 5 kilometers west of that point, the point where we had split up to fight the other members of Oración. The battle raged on with Racer holding a bit of the upper hand due to having more battle experience than Wendy, but she was very much capable of keeping up, and even exceeding his speed when he utilized his speed magic. Naruto and Kurama raised their eyebrows at that. Interesting, Naruto commented. How did she fare overall in the battle? Kurama asked. Charles gained a small smile on her face. Wendy grew a bit of a personality trigger where she is initially very withdrawn, but once you call her weak she will snap and suddenly turn into one of the strongest 12-year-old mages you would ever see on the face of Earthland. The battle was practically even, but later on Racer began to take the offensive and began to win. However, he pulled the personality trigger for Wendy and she countered. And, Naruto raised a curious eyebrow. She won. Charles said with pride in her voice. You would be very proud of how far she has come. She's completely mastered the hit and run fighting style she said you had taught her to use. She even took a few years trying and then succeeding in perfecting an attack she based off of one of your own. Tenryu no Rasengan she calls it. In fact, even her clothing style is based off of yours. Naruto and Kurama's eyes widened at that. Kurama grinned widely before breaking out into a fit of laughter while Naruto remained shell-shocked. Naruto felt his facial muscles tug beneath his mask, but he restrained them. The would-be smile was reduced to a smirk. Damn, Kurama muttered before turning to face Naruto. You really had an impact on that brat, and it seems she's become really strong if she could take down an S-class level mage on her own at her age. Of course she became strong, she's my student and my imoudo. Naruto muttered before chuckling. She's completely exceeded my expectations. Mine as well, Kurama said with a nod. The two SS-class criminals gained a look of nostalgia as they reminisced about the times when they first met the young Sky Dragonslayer. Weak, always crying, she couldn't even sleep at night by herself ever since the day she met Naruto and Kurama. You sound like you've really grown up, Sky Dragon. Naruto shook his head to free it of its current thoughts. Naruto-san. Yes, before we move on with our current topic of discussion, I would just like to know, how do you know my name? Charles asked with a tilt of her head. Kurama gave her an equally confused look. Well, that's an odd question. Of course that would sound odd from our perspective, but then again, having a spy network does have its advantages, Kurama stated bluntly. What? Charles blinked in confusion. We haven't visited her and we haven't even made any form of contact with her in the past 6 years. But recently we've been able to amass a spy network and thus managed to gain a bit of intelligence regarding the light guilds of Fury. Kate Shelter being one of those guilds. Obviously, we gleaned some information regarding little Wendy and you as well, Charles. Charlie's brown eyes were wide in shock and amazement. Just how influential are you two? Kurama patted the female exceed on her cheek. Oh my dear Charles-chan, you have no idea how good we are. Charles looked at the grinning crimson exceed, a small blush forming on her face at being treated like a kitten. Charles. Naruto's voice snapped her out of her thoughts. Her brown eyes met Naruto's blue ones. Yes, Naruto-san. That clearing to the east, that's where you said Wendy had concluded her battle with Racer, correct? Aye. Charles nodded. His body is still there and she couldn't bring herself to kill him. She said she couldn't be like you and that she is her own person. Copying you all the time wouldn't always get her anywhere after all. Naruto rolled his eyes, a small smirk forming beneath his face mask. That little girl was always soft-hearted, but then again, that was one of her most prominent characteristics. His eyes then focused back on the clearing. Kurama, come. Right behind ya. The two took off towards the clearing and Charles quickly flapped her wings to fly alongside them. Wait, why are you going there? If what you say is true and Wendy hasn't killed Racer, then logical thinking dictates that he's only unconscious. The Apocalypse Dragonslayer replied. Wendy is one of the few I hold dear to me. They've taken her and we need information. Kurama's eyes glowed with a demonic light before his lips stretched out into a wide, fanged grin. And we will do whatever is necessary to get that little girl back. A sonic boom echoed through the air and Charles was blown back from the winds generated by the sound barrier being broken. Insert music. 2 steps from Hell Power of Dar HQ, Would See, Fury. Jellal. Zabrak's voice echoed through the cavernous room. His large frame cleared the distance between himself and the unconscious user of the former R system. His silver eyes flashed with murderous intent. His teeth gritted beneath his mask and his muscles bulged beneath his skin. Rearing back a massive right fist, he aimed to crush the blue-haired man into a bloody pulp. Brain tapped Clawdoa on the ground. The clack of the staff's butt seeming to overshadow the deafening roars of the hellspawn of the Tower of Heaven. Dark magic. Shadow bind. Brain spoke calmly. The shadows around Zabrak sprung to life, rising like serpents from the ground as the magic of the Oracion Siete master flowed through them. The tendrils of shadow lashed out, morphing into the likeliness of black chains, all of which were composed of pure shadow-based magic energy. Unbreakable and unwilling to move without consent from their user, these chains were probably one of the greatest binding agents in magic. Zabrak found his fist hanging a mere millimeter away from his target's face. His arms, legs, neck and torso were wrapped tightly by the chains of shadow. He struggled to move, only managing to tense his musculature. He gave another bestial roar of rage and shifted his eyes to the side. Brain, let me go. I'll kill this bastard. I'll kill this motherfucker for putting me back in that hellhole. Zabrak roared. The other members of Oracion Siete and Wendy all took a step back in fear and surprise as the raging behemoth struggled to try and bring an end to the man that made him a slave twice over. The magic energy mixed with killing intent flowed off of the silver-haired titan in waves, flooding the room with its pressure. Gravity seemed to increase and it became quite a bit difficult to breathe, but Brain seemed to be the only one unaffected. And Clawdoa, but he was a talking, yet very inanimate object, so he didn't count. Very persuasive of you, Zabrak. Trying to reason me for letting you go with blatantly telling me that you wish to kill the pawn that I worked so very hard to find. Brain deadpanned. Truly you are a master politician. I have no need for your sarcasm, Brain. Let me go now. Zabrak found his demand met with a negative reply as the energy chains around his body tightened around his iron-hard skin. Calm your rage, my titan. Then, I will undo your chains. Brain replied with a much sterner tone. The malice in his voice was much more prominent. Zabrak growled as he shifted his gaze to the right where his master stood. He knew he was stuck. The chains were constructed out of pure energy and shadow. Not even his superhuman strength could break bindings of an unbreakable substance. Energy could not be created and it not be destroyed. Only change. One of the many laws of the universe and one that Zabrak knew very well. Zabrak took a few deep breaths and nodded his head. The fierce rage in his eyes died down and the killing intent and magic energy spikes became practically non-existent. Brain smirked and dragged Zabrak back, away from Jalal's chained visage. He tapped Clawdoa on the ground and snapped his fingers, the sound echoing off the walls of the rocky walls of the Dark Guild's hideout. The shadow bindings were undone and Zabrak rolled his shoulders and stretched out his body to get his blood flowing. Wendy gulped as she looked at the 7-foot-tall man. What kind of monster is he, to generate such magic energy and killing intent? Only Naruto Oni-san and Kurama-chan have ever had a bloodlust comparable to his. Brain tapped Clawdoa on the ground once more before walking over to Zabrak. Patting the taller man on the shoulder, he gave a nod of approval. Excellent, Zabrak. Now then, it is time to proceed with the plan to resurrect our mighty nirvana and bring about our prayers, to make the dreams that we pray to the heavens that they may come true, reality. Brain grinned toothily before turning to Wendy. That is where you come in, my little sky Dragonslayer. What? Wendy blinked in confusion. Watch. Brain spoke with a commanding tone. The master of Oracion Siete walked over to the blue-haired man. With a swipe of Clawdoa, the staff of bone sliced through the steel chains like a hot knife through butter. The green and black aura surrounding the bone staff was visible for all to see. The chains clanked and clinked loudly as they fell to the ground. Brain then raised his left hand and made a gun shape with it, his index and middle fingers standing straight out. The same black and green aura that surrounded Clawdoa now coated the tips of his outstretched fingers. Time to wake up. My little pawn. He tapped Jalal on the forehead and Jalal's body shuddered wildly. For a few seconds it looked as if the tattooed mage was undergoing a seizure, but it quickly died down and slowly, the man's eyes opened. Black pupils contracted and relaxed as they adjusted to the light, or lack thereof. Glancing around the cavernous room, the tired-looking man settled his eyes on Brain. Where am I? Who are you? Jalal's eyes glanced down at himself, raising his hands to his face. Who am I? It's all right, young man. It's all right. Brain spoke in a soothing tone of voice, a tone that anyone who didn't suffer from amnesia could pick up on and know that it was entirely fake. What's going on? Jalal asked, his voice raising in volume along with his leveled panic. It's all right. I'm your teacher, or rather I was your teacher. Master Brain, remember? The former Magic Council member asked with a kind smile. Jalal's eyes, along with everyone else's, widened at the information. Is that true, Master? Hatai asked. You were really this man's teacher? In a past life, yes, I was. You were but a young boy and I had still kept a job at the Bureau of Magic Development, Sadly though, you were taken away to be used as labor for the construction of the first R system when you decided to just run away after only 1 year's worth of teaching. You are a very talented soul, my student. Having learned the rune magic, self-destruct spell in under a month, you could have accomplished many great feats. Jalal's eyes were still wide, but he shook his head. Sorry, he gritted his teeth as he stumbled out of the coffin he had been sleeping in, holding the edge of it for support. He clutched his head as the throbbing he felt made it feel as if his skull was about to split apart. I don't remember anything. Well, allow me to shed some light on the situation, my former student. Brain said, your name is Jalal Fernandez, you are 19 years old. You were born in the year X 764. Your parents, presumably dead seeing as how you were by yourself when I found you when you were about 4 years old. Your birthplace and other sorts of personal information are completely unknown. You are a mage who bewitched the Magic Council into believing you were one of them but actually used them to further your own gains in creating the second R system in order to resurrect an ancient evil and failed when you were defeated by a light guild known as Fairy Tail. Encased in the excess magic of the mighty Etherion, you were lost and I found you when you washed up on the beaches of the mainland. Why you saved me then? Jalal asked. The information was a lot to take in, but given his state of mind and body, it was only understandable that he would focus on that specific piece of information. I placed you in this coffin while trying to break you out of the Etherion casing. The effects of being encased in it is what placed you into a coma in the first place. After I broke you free of the Etherion, I had to bind you in chains to make sure that if you proved to be hostile you would not try to kill me. Clearly you were docile, Jalal, but you understand the reasoning behind my actions obviously. Brain explained. Jalal nodded and then bowed his head. I do, and so you have my thanks, Master Brain, Jalal replied. You're most welcome. However, Jalal, there is something I must ask if awakened fully. And that is, I know it will be a difficult task, but even with amnesia, there have been cases where subjects remember flashes of information. Things that they knew prior to being an amnesiac. I don't know. I will try, but I highly doubt that it will succeed. Jalal frowned. Brain waved his hand. I highly doubt that, but let's just see if you can recall anything. Tell me now, what do you know of the ancient magic, Nirvana? Brain asked. Jalal tilted his head in confusion. Nirvana? Yes, Nirvana. What do you know of it, more precisely? Do you remember its location? Brain asked. Jalal gripped his skull in pain as he felt it throb. His brain trying desperately to remember what it was about this Nirvana thing that Brain wanted to know. Jalal panted and fell to one knee, exhausted from the mental strain of trying to forcibly call upon lost memories. I'm sorry. I can't remember anything. Jalal frowned. Brain shook his head. I see. Brain waved his hand. Well then, I guess it's a good thing we have her here. Everyone's eyes shifted to the daughter of Grandine as Brain pointed at her. Wendy tilted her head in confusion. Her? What can she do? She's just a little girl? Jalal asked with surprise. Wendy frowned. I'm a little girl who could most likely kick your ass thoroughly and painfully, she thought. But really though, what can I do? She is the Sky Dragonslayer, a daughter of a dragon. Jalal's eyes widened at that, his gaze showing he held newfound respect for the preteen. She is taught in the ways of healing wounds that no regular healing mage can. Brain explained. And I am sure the regeneration of brain cells is something within the scope of her abilities. Jalal turned to Wendy with a hopeful look in his eyes. Wendy returned it with a harsh glare, causing the older man to flinch. And what would make you think that I would do anything of the sort? Because if you don't, Brain stalked up to the girl, his towering form easily overshadowing her smaller frame. Then I will beat you down until you comply. I will chain you to the walls of this cavern and torture you beyond the limits of your own body. And should you still resist, I will destroy the very guild that you hold dear. Wendy's brown eyes widened. Nope. Wendy released a bestial roar and went to strike the guild master. She had fallen before his might once before, but rage clouded her judgment. Brain grinned widely and snatched her out of the air as she went to strike his face, his large hand gripping her throat. He slammed her into the ground, the rock cracking beneath her form. He then swung Cladoa as if he were a golf club and Wendy rocketed through the air before slamming into a stalagmite. The bruise and bleeding wound on her head released wisps of steam as her healing factor kicked in. Being the Sky Dragonslayer gave more than just power after all. Oh yes, and I will take you down from the wall and make you watch as I and my subordinates slaughter every man, woman and child within that pitiful light guild you call home. Kate's shelter will be nothing but ashes, and when all is said and done, I will crush the little kitten beneath my heel. You dare to touch even a single hair on Charles and I'll shred your face, you asshole. Wendy rose back to her feet, but Brain had already materialized before her. Cladoa was raised high. I'd like to see you try. Brain swung Cladoa quickly and Wendy could only flinch. She shut her eyes tightly and prepared for the pain that would fill her body, but after a second passed she opened her eyes. Having felt no form of pain whatsoever, Wendy glanced up at the master of Oración Siete. She released a gasp when she saw Brain's arm being held back by the silver-haired giant. Zabrak-san. Wendy stared up at the 7-foot-tall man as he easily held back his master's striking arm with his superhuman strength. Zabrak, what are you doing? Release me this instant, Brain ordered. Zabrak's eyes narrowed before he shoved Brain away, and Zabrak's equivalent of a shove was equal to being tossed aside like a rag doll. Brain flipped in the air and landed on his feet before pointing Klodoa at Zabrak, the Skullstaff's eyes blazing with magic energy. Are you defying your master? No. Zabrak stomped in front of Wendy. But I am preventing a young child from being beaten. You yourself had appointed me to watch her when you captured her. Therefore, I am her protector in this matter. Not to mention you were the one who stated that she should not be harmed so as to allow her to use her magic to her best ability, or are you saying that you do not wish to find Nirvana, Master Brain? Zabrak grinned beneath his mask as he saw his master fume from having his own words used against him. The dark-skinned man glared at the density magic user. Fine. He growled out the word. Zabrak nodded before turning around to face Wendy, who looked up at him in awe. He knelt down and drew back a lock of her hair and glanced with amazement as he saw the lack of a wound from which the trail of blood came from. You have no wounds? Wendy shook herself out of stupor at Zabrak's words before nodding her head. No, I heal quickly. You saved me though, why? Like I have said before, the abuse of children is not something I take joy in. Being a part of the Tower of Heaven makes one very much aware of that. He glanced out of the corner of his eye, trying to burn a hole in Jalal's confused face with his glare. Wendy looked at Zabrak and then to Jalal. The blue-haired Dragonslayer ran a hand through her hair and sighed. Fine. I'll use my magic on his brain. Wendy said loud enough for everyone to hear. The Oracion Siete members snapped their heads in her direction. What? They all exclaimed. You can't be serious, Zabrak asked, his eye twitching at the sudden change in the Sky Dragonslayer. The daughter of Grandine walked past her proclaimed protector and stopped before Jalal. I am a healer and it is my obligation to help those who need it. I've studied magic and anatomy during my time at Cage Shelter because Master Rubold thought it would be best serve me in the long run when I became a fully qualified mage of his guild. Brain-san, can you tell me what a Therion is? Brain shook his head as he and Klodoa looked at each other and then back to Wendy. Are you sure we can trust her to do this? Klodoa whispered, she could just be lying. She's a 12-year-old girl, Brain whispered back. A 12-year-old girl who just defeated Racer by herself and can move faster than the speed of sound. Klodoa deadpanned, earning him glare from his holder. Fine, do what you want. Don't listen to the talking Skullstaff, it's never helped you anyway. Ignoring the skull and its sarcasm, Brain turned back to Wendy. A Therion is a massive collection of Eternano. It contains the elements of every single form of magic that can be converted into energy. Fire, wind, electricity, shadow, light and water. All of these elements are combined into a single, powerful energy burst that can wipe an entire city off the face of the map in a single strike. No one has ever been encased in its crystalline form, so the effects are unknown. At least, they were unknown. I see. Wendy's hands then glowed with a soft sky blue aura. Kneel. Jalal blinked in confusion, but did as he was told. He knelt before the young girl and bent his head. Wendy ran her hand over the blue-haired man's head, closing her eyes to concentrate. Interesting, she thought. The magic from this Etherion completely wiped out his memory and inflicted significant damage to his brain cells. It'd be a miracle should he ever recover from it, and the conflicting elements within his body from being in close proximity to such potent Eternano has the ability to counteract my magic and prevent it from working on his body. There's nothing I can do to bring back his memory. Wendy's eyes twinkled with mischief, but that's not the goal for me. Alright, I'm going to put some magic into his brain neural network in his brain. It might trigger something, but then again, it might not. Wendy said. The Oracion Siete members could only nod. Other than Brain, the others didn't have any sort of extensive knowledge on the human body and how it worked, so they could only trust her word. Bad move. Cobra's eyes widened as he finally heard the Dragonslayer's thoughts. He hadn't really taken her sadistic level of thinking into consideration because he thought she was just being really pissed off from being kidnapped and nearly killed. But now that he had a clear understanding of what her thought process was, he finally caught on to what she was planning. Insert music. Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood to be Kane. Stop her. What? Everyone turned to Cobra with confused looks on their faces, but they snapped in Wendy's direction as they heard her chuckle. Too late, Wendy stated as she glanced back at Cobra. Wendy's glowing hands touched the older brunette's forehead and she channeled her magic energy into his skull, guiding it through his brain. The magic energy flowed along his neurons, moving across axons and dendrites until she reached her objective, the pituitary gland and hypothalamus. She then shoved her magic energy in at rate that it would charge his brain, but not overloaded to kill him. The man's eyes snapped open and Wendy grinned toothily. Now let's see if you choose fight or flight, she said before directing her blue-haired patient to follow the commands of her healing magic. She controlled his hormone secretion rates and chose one specific hormone in particular. Her magic charged to his adrenal gland and the adrenaline shot forth. Jalal's pupils dilated and his survival instincts kicked. Adrenaline and magic energy flooded the amnesiac's body, and Wendy backed away from the man as he seemed to act on autopilot. He shot off from his position on the ground and pointed his fingers upwards. A golden magic seal burst forth in the air and 7 arrows of pure light shot towards the ceiling, blowing it apart. The light of the outside world flooded the caverns of Orochimaru's base. Jalal's body glowed with golden light before he shot off into the air, out of the hole he just created, and escaped the clutches of the guild that wished to use him for their own purposes. Brain stared in shock at the trail of golden light left behind by Jalal's motion before fixating on Wendy. What have you done?" he roared. "I did as I said I would." "You didn't restore his memory." "I never said I'd restore his memory," Wendy replied. "I said I'd use my magic on his brain. Manipulating his hormones by taking control of the pituitary gland and hypothalamus is child's play, and thus I gave his body the boost it needed to recall the ability to remember how to survive, to call upon the survival instincts ingrained into all living creatures' anatomy. I made him remember something, all right, Brain-san. I made him remember how to fight." Wendy then charged magic beneath her feet and the air followed her commands. "And now it's time I take my leave." She pushed off of the ground, the force of the air she manipulated forming a crater. She then disappeared into the air and ran off in the same direction as Jalal. "You little bitch." Brain's body shook with rage. Zabrak began to break out into fits of laughter, clutching his stomach from how hard he was laughing. "I told you," Klodoa said, "but does anyone listen to me? No, see, this is why you should. Shut up, Klodoa. The skull staff immediately did as it was told. "All of you, after her." "Yes, master." The other members of Orochimaru, minus Zabrak and Midnight, saluted to their leader. Cobra leapt atop Cubelios and grabbed Hot Eye while Angel spread her wings and pulled Midnight along by his magic carpet as the dark-haired mage slept. Zabrak, however, remained laughing in front of his master and his talking weapon. "Stop laughing, you insolent fool," Brain roared. Zabrak wiped the tears that formed from his peals of laughter. "Are you mad?" Zabrak asked. "You got tricked by a 12-year-old, and not to mention she escaped your clutches with the very man you wanted to help you find Nirvana. This is hilarious." "He does have a point, Brain," Klodoa said with a chuckle. "Being played by a 12-year-old girl with nothing but the knowledge of the human body at her disposal does seem very amusing in my eyes, but seeing as I'm a skull, I have none. Yo ho 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 ho. Stop laughing, both of you." Brain dragged one of his hands down his face as he clutched Klodoa tightly in the other. "I will kill that little wench and I will have Nirvana when I find Jalal. And I don't need you," he pointed at Zabrak, "to do it. As if I care what you say to me. I've never cared, Brain. I've only done as you've asked because it would help me in the long run to protect my fellow former slaves, the ones you made into your subordinates. However, seeing as how everything is crashing down around you, I see no way you can keep this up. It will be very amusing to watch." Brain ignored the silver-haired titan and the 2 humans, and one laughing staff exited the guild headquarters to chase after the 2 blue-haired targets. Northern area, Wood Sea, Fury. The 2 zoomed through the air, easily clearing the distance between their previous location and the small clearing which Charles pointed out to be their intended destination. Arcing upwards, Naruto stopped generating the magic necessary to keep himself aloft, deactivating his futon. Tobu spell. Kurama's body glowed with red light and his fox-themed costume began to attach to his body as if it were a second skin. Lengthening, twisting and changing, the small feline became the monstrous multi-tailed canine he was feared throughout the kingdom as. They allowed gravity to take its hold on them. Kurama and Naruto landed with great force, the ground cratering beneath their feet. The blonde Dragonslayer and the crimson-furred Kitsune glanced around the area before spying the unconscious form of Racer laying within a sizable crater. Naruto knelt down to Racer's form while Kurama dragged the body out of the indentation in the ground. Tossing the body on the ground like an old chew toy, the Onibi Myobu admired Wendy's handiwork. "Ouch, that spiral wound has got to hurt." "So, she really did manage to recreate the Rasengan, it seems," Naruto muttered, "but I don't have time to mutter praises for my Imoudo." The blonde reached over to the unconscious Racer and flipped him over onto his back before raising him up by the collar of his torn leotard. He looks different," Kurama pointed out. Naruto's sweat dropped. "Gee, what gave it away?" he asked sarcastically, and Kurama, being Kurama, gave the physically 20-year-old man an answer. "Well, first off, he's wearing a black and red leotard, has something akin to a tail sprouting out of his ass, and he has fangs." Kurama replied with a grin. "And yes, I did know you were being sarcastic. I hate you. Love you too, buddy." Naruto turned his attention away from the annoying 3-tailed Kitsune and fixated his harsh gaze on Racer before holding him up in front of Kurama. "Wake him up." "Oh boy, it's been ages since I've done something like this." Kurama pawed the ground before taking a solid stance. Inhaling deeply, Kurama puffed out his chest as he gathered the necessary amount of air. And then he roared. The roar of the mighty Kitsune was positively deafening and powerful enough to shock Racer out of unconsciousness. "What the? Ah!" Racer screamed as he faced the roaring form of Kurama. The speed magic user panted heavily as he was dropped on the ground. He scrambled on the ground, moving frantically to get away from the fox, but came to a sudden halt when he ran into Naruto's legs. Racer screamed louder, but he was cornered. With a Dragonslayer in the front and a monstrous Kitsune on the other side, the dark mage could only tremble in fear as the two creatures that haunted his dreams stood before him. "Good, you're awake." Kurama chuckled darkly before "Foe, have some questions for you." "Pete, please don't kill me." Racer gulped. He released a yelp of surprise when Naruto grabbed him by his collar once more and heaved him into the air so that the taller mage could look at him in the eye. The blazing blue eyes of the son of two wizard saints stared into Racer's dark-colored eyes, and Naruto chuckled in amusement as the fanged dark mage shivered in his grasp. "You're absolutely pitiful, you know that?" Naruto asked rhetorically. Racer gulped audibly before he was pulled in closer. "Now listen here, you annoying little piece of shit. You went after my little sister. My Imouto is not some toy you can take whenever you want, whenever you need it. She is a prideful Dragonslayer, and from what I've heard, she thoroughly kicked your sorry ass into the ground." I. Shut up." Racer flinched at Naruto's harsh tone. "Now tell me, where is your guild's base of operations?" Why do you want to know? Racer released a lengthy cry of pain when Kurama bit down on his right arm and with a sickening crunch, broke the arm at the elbow joint. The limb was now a bloodied, mangled mess of tissue and broken bone. "Answer me and you won't lose another limb. Where is Orochimaru's base of operations?" I can't answer. Kurama wrapped his tails around Racer's left arm and pulled it harshly out of the socket before pulling down on the forearm area so that it hung limply in the air. Racer was literally crying right now. "Where is the Dark Guild Orochimaru?" He flung Racer down on the ground and stamped his boot down on Racer's left leg. "Tell me." It's in the north," he squealed. We have our base in a cave complex just a few miles north of this location. Please let me go. I'll do anything. Just let me go alive." Tears streamed down Racer's face, but Naruto and Kurama merely growled at the crying man. "Not yet, human." Naruto snarled. "Next question, where's my little sister?" What? Where is my Imouto?" Naruto snarled as he placed more pressure on Racer's left leg, the bone audibly creaking from the strain. "What are you? Who are you talking about?" Racer exclaimed. "Answer me, you despicable human." Naruto's eyes flashed to a brilliant white. The fearful white that plagued Racer's thoughts. The eyes of a monster. A loud snap echoed through the air as Racer's tibia was broken in two, the bone protruding from the leg. Bone marrow and blood flowed from the wound. "Don't give us that shit, Orochimaru," Kurama said. "Where's the little girl you all took from the Light Guild Alliance? The little blue-haired girl you all tried to take from us 7 years ago and failed in trying to do so?" Both Kitsune and Dragonslayer stomped down on Racer's right leg, the limb easily breaking apart. Racer was crying and bleeding on the ground as Naruto roared in his face. "Where is Skydragon? Where is Wendy Marvel?" I don't. I was unconscious. I can't possibly know. She defeated me, just like you said. She rammed some spinning wind ball into my back and I blacked out from the pain." A moment of silence passed between the three, the only sound being the whimpers of fear and pain from the fanged dark mage. "Then you are of no use to us as of this moment, Racer of Orochimaru," Kurama stated. Racer's eyes widened. Please let me go. I don't want to die. Please, have mercy on me." Naruto and Kurama looked at the pitiful man before them. His limbs were broken and bloodied, and not to mention he was crying rivers. But Naruto made a promise, and starting now, he would fulfill that promise. 7 years ago, you and your guild made an attempt to take away Skydragon from myself and the Kitsune. We fought you all off. We defeated you utterly and completely, and your strongest mage at that time, the one who you called Midnight. I broke his arms. I made the threat. I swore to your guild that should you all try again to take Wendy Marvel into your custody again, I would hunt every single one of you insignificant little human down. That I would find you. He held up his clawed hands, the sharp nails glinting in the sunlight. And that I would kill you. No, please no. Racer struggled to crawl away, but Naruto stamped down on all 4 of his broken limbs. Cracks and snaps echoed through the air, mixed with Racer's screams and cries. "I am a dragon. A dragon carries out its promises as per their moral code. We adhere to all vows and promises that we make. I have made mine, and thus I will carry out my vow." Naruto raised his boot and stamped down Racer's left shoulder and gripped the broken left arm before pulling it. The skin tore, followed by muscle fibers and blood vessels. More blood was spilled as the left arm was torn out. Naruto's hand lashed out and gripped Racer by his mangled right arm. With a harsh tug, he literally tore the limb from Racer's body and tossed it aside. Blood flowed and sprayed from the newly formed wound. Kurama used 2 of his 3 tails and wrapped them around Racer's legs. The man's voice was hoarse from all the screaming he was doing, but he continued to do so as Kurama snapped the dark mage's femurs and burned his legs off. The charred flesh was then forcefully ripped apart by Kurama's teeth, and thus Racer's legs were now completely lost to him. Holding the legs in his jaws, Kurama applied more pressure, resulting in the legs breaking apart into burnt pieces of flesh and bone. Racer's consciousness flickered in and out, but Naruto would have none of it. He roared and the bestial sound kept Racer from falling into the bliss of darkness. The clawed hand of the Dragonslayer wrapped around his throat and began to squeeze. Racer gasped and wheezed, trying so very hard to take back the oxygen he wanted. However, Naruto's grip made sure that he would be denied the pleasure. His face turned blue and Naruto applied more pressure. A sadistic grin stretched out across Naruto's face, his white eyes shining with malicious glee. Die! With a sickening crunch, Naruto crushed the man's neck and with great strength, tore the head from its body. The shocked and frightened look on Racer's face was forever etched onto his severed head, and the blood dripped from the mangled mess that used to be his neck, staining the grass scarlet. Burn the human! Kurama complied and gathered the man's body parts before setting them afire with his crimson flames. Do you think we went a bit overboard? Kurama asked. No, Kurama grinned widely. Good, neither did I now. Let's find us some dark mages to slaughter. Northern would see, Fury, so happy. Did you find anything? Gray asked. The blue-furred exceed flew down from the air after having done a bit of recon and shook his head. No sorry, Gray, Urza. But the tree canopies are too thick. The only way you can see something from above is if the area was clear, and the woodsea's vegetation is much too dense in most areas. Lucy could be anywhere, he replied. Well, you've done all you could, Gray said, patting his head. Urza nodded in agreement. Gray's right, Happy. You've done what you could, but it's best we leave our trekking up to Natsu now. She said this with a frown. However, the son of Igneal had his head raised to the air, trying to pick up on Lucy's scent. His lack of hearing hindered him greatly, and it was obvious that sight wasn't going to be much of a help. His sense of smell was all they could rely on. Natsu didn't even know sign language of any kind, so it took a very long 10 minutes to get across the message that they all wanted to try and look for Lucy since their battle with Cobra was over. Then again, you wouldn't expect the loud idiot of a Dragonslayer to learn something as allegedly complicated as sign language, but with his deafness, Natsu was actually picking up on the lip-reading skill he never had. The group of 4 wandered through the woodsea for a few more minutes until Natsu's sniffing visage came to an abrupt halt. What's the matter, boy? You smell something? Gray asked with a chuckle. He received a slap on the HSULT. He's not a dog, Gray. Besides, he can't even hear us, the crimson-haired mage replied. The armored woman patted Natsu on the shoulder and his head snapped in her direction. Her own eyes widened when she saw the surprised look on his own face. What's wrong? She mouthed out to him. Natsu read her lips and pointed straight ahead of them. I smell blood, he yelled. God, being deaf really made its downsides prominent. Ignoring the fact that Natsu had to constantly yell whenever he wanted to actually talk, Urza, Gray and Happy focused on the words he had just uttered. The scarf-wearing Dragonslayer then took off straight ahead with his guild mates following close behind him. They found themselves navigating through the thick brush, leaping over large tree roots and swinging through branches sometimes. Finally, they came to a stop. Their eyes were wide when they saw the scorched land. Tree trunks were blackened and some had collapsed, and lying in the dirt was the unconscious form of their blonde guild mate. Lucy. They quickly ran to her side. Natsu reached first and looked over the celestial spirit mage. She was laying on her side, so he rolled her onto her back and he winced when he saw her peeling and reddened skin. Being a user of fire, he knew the symptoms of being burned very well. A trail of dried blood traced back to her mouth. Her clothes were very much torn. Urza glanced around before seeing the kusarigama laying a few feet away from Lucy's form. She picked it up and decided to keep it in her requib dimension for safekeeping until Lucy woke. Who did she fight against again? Happy asked. Angel, the sole female member of Oracion. Urza reminded the group. Angel's body is nowhere here, so it can only be assumed that Lucy lost, much like we did against Cobra. Given by the trend, I would go so far as to say all of us in the Light Guild Alliance had trouble against our opponents. The Oracion Siete are truly a strong dark guild. Natsu held Lucy tightly against his body and gritted his teeth. He rose to his feet and handed the blonde over to Gray. The black-haired Godslayer took the celestial spirit mage from his best friend and rival, but with a confused look on his face. Natsu, what are you? He froze when Natsu's head snapped in his direction, his pupils slitted and his fangs bared. They'll pay. Whether it had been from his deafness or not, Natsu would have yelled out his proclamation either way. The rage in Natsu's voice was apparent, however. Before Natsu could storm off, Urza grabbed him by his arm. The fire Dragonslayer made eye contact with his brown-eyed friend and growled at her, "Let go." Urza pointed at Natsu's ears. I don't care if I'm deaf. They hurt my nakama. They hurt Lucy. Natsu's fists clenched tightly. And I'm not going to stand for that. The red-haired woman gave him a nod of understanding, but shook head once more to show her views on him going off to fight. Natsu tried to remove his arm from Urza's grip, but the re-equipped mage spun him around and twisted his arm behind his back, which put strain on his shoulder and upper arm muscles, effectively holding him in place lest he wanted to tear his arm. The physically stronger mage forced Natsu to his knees, and the amber-eyed Dragonslayer glanced up at Urza to yell at her again. His words stuck in his throat when he looked at her face. The wielder of Caliburn held just as much rage in her eyes as his did. He looked to her lips. "We will get them back, Natsu. I swear that to you, but for now we need to find the others in the alliance and make sure they're okay," Urza said. Natsu had only managed to lip-read about half of that, but he got the gist of her unheard words. With a nod, Natsu took a deep breath and calmed his rage. Seeing he was now calm, Urza released Natsu, and the fire Dragonslayer rolled his shoulder and flexed his arm before glancing back at Urza. "That hurt," he muttered. Gray rolled his eyes and adjusted the blonde in his arms. Even without hearing, the pink-haired mage was just as annoying as ever. Except louder. Natsu once again guided them through the forested area, using his enhanced sense of smell to help them walk through the foliage. Happy took to the skies to observe from above, telling them which way they had to go or how close they were getting to the original clearing they had reached before Orochimaru ambushed them. After a few minutes of walking, the group managed to make their way back to the clearing. There they found Lamina scale, minus Juranikis, laying on the ground. Their clothes were torn in many places and blood caked the cut areas. They ran up to them, and Gray set Lucy down gently before joining his friends in waking up the members of Lamina scale. "Leon! Leon, wake up!" Gray exclaimed, shaking the white-haired mage's body. Leon grunted, his eye muscles clenching tightly as he began to stir. Sherry-san, Toby-san, Suzuki-san. Urza did the same with the three aforementioned mages and got the same response. The four members of Lamina scale groaned before lifting their bodies into sitting positions. "What happened?" Sherry muttered to herself, rubbing her head. "Huh?" Leon blinked and turned to see Gray kneeling next to him. "Gray, why are you here? What happened?" "Urza, Natsu and I got beaten by Cobra and his pet snake," Gray replied. "Natsu got the worst of it." "What do you mean?" Leon turned to the rosette Dragonslayer, seeing him kneeling over Lucy's unconscious form in a protective manner. "He looks fine, though your blonde teammate is the one I'd be worried about." "Natsu's deaf," Gray informed him. Lion's eyes widened and the other members of Lamina scale snapped their heads in Gray's direction. "What?" they exclaimed. Cobra used his sound magic to manipulate the sound waves in an explosion attack Urza and Natsu used. He directed them back at Natsu and ended up deafening him. "We don't know if it's permanent or not." The Ice Godslayer frowned when he looked back to the Fire Dragonslayer. "We can only hope he can get his hearing back." "Your blonde guild mate and went to do battle with Angel. Judging from her condition, I'm assuming that she either lost or was victorious but blacked out from her wounds," Leon guessed. "The former." Urza spoke this time. Angel's body was nowhere near the battleground. "So what about you guys?" Gray asked. "What happened to you that all four of you got knocked unconscious?" "We were fighting Midnight," Suzuki answered. His reflector magic allowed him to repel our magic attacks, and when we went for physical strikes he reflected the air around him to create ethereal blades of pressurized air. It's what made these large cuts on our bodies. Leon Kun's ice walls and Suzuki's energy walls could only do so much to protect us from them, as they were sometimes too fast to block, not to mention it's nigh impossible to see air. Sherry added. "My rock dolls that I made with my doll play magic could barely get close enough to try and score an attack. I wasn't much use either." Toby's dog-like ears flattened against his head as if they were actual dog ears. "The battle was like fighting on a seesaw. Sometimes we would pull a fast one and nearly score some attacks here and there, but he'd quickly counter with his attacks or reflecting barriers. The odd thing is that the guy was sleeping and never woke up. It's like he was doing it on instinct." Gray and Urza stared at the ice mage before them. "He was asleep," they exclaimed. Leon nodded. It was unreal. However, a few minutes into the fight, Midnight stopped attacking us, and that giant of a man, the silver-haired mage that no one knows, he showed up standing behind us. He said how that they had orders to return to their headquarters. We didn't even have time to raise a counter before he knocked us all out. "Well, actually that explains our headaches," Toby muttered. "But still, we probably got off easy. The guy could have crushed our skulls if he wanted to." "I think we may have underestimated the skills of our opponents," Urza said. "Even for dark mages they are much stronger than expected. We now have a bit more information on our enemies regarding their level of strength. We need to up our ante and not be as cautious as we had been when we first fought." Leon planted his fist in his palm to emphasize his words. "Now the plan would be that we need to regroup by finding Blue Pegasus and Cade Shelter. We also have to look for Jura-san," Urza added. "He could be in danger, seeing as how the uchiha who was with us during our alliance meeting was a fake made by Angel's celestial spirit." One that can copy appearances down to the scent and feel of their magic, since Natsu's senses weren't tipped off and I felt nothing wrong with his magic energy. Yes, having Jura back on the fighting force could bolster our strength tenfold, seeing as how he is a wizard saint, Gray agreed. Well then we should split up, Suzuki suggested. We will go look for Jura and the members of Blue Pegasus. You all will head out and look for Wendy and Charles. Since Wendy is a Dragonslayer, Natsu should be able to have a better time tracking her by scent. I know you said he's been deafened by Cobra's attack, but as an added plus, Wendy might also be able to heal his hearing. Aye sir, Happy saluted. Gray agreed with a nod. Having this idiot yell all the time when he wants to talk will be a blessing on our ears. Ain't that right, Natsu? Natsu turned away from Lucy when he noticed everyone staring at him. He blinked in confusion. What? Everyone covered their ears from the sudden outburst. Definitely a blessing. All the Lamina scale members muttered. The mages then climbed to their feet, Natsu picking up Lucy when he saw his friend standing up. Gray. The Ice Godslayer looked to his crimson-haired guild mate with a confused look. Yeah? Take Lucy and Happy and head back to the Alliance meeting house while the rest of us go on the search? What? Gray exclaimed. Why? I want to help look for Charles-chan, Happy whined, waving his paws frantically. Look at the facts and think logically, Gray. Happy. Urza replied calmly. Natsu is the only one with the ability to track. Happy, you may be a cat which has greater hearing capabilities, but you do not have a Dragonslayer's nose. Not to mention, should Natsu regain his hearing, it far exceeds your own. Also, you are not the best when it comes to combat. Your use in the battlefield has always been to provide Natsu with the ability to fly or fast travel. Happy's head dropped as his faults were pointed out. An anime cloud of shame and depression hung over his head. Well, that's Happy, but why should I go? Happy can easily carry Lucy, shown by how he can carry Natsu, and Natsu's a big fat turd. Everyone, signs the deaf Dragonslayer and the girl he held. Sweat dropped at Gray's words. The reason why you need to go is because we can't send Happy off by himself. Lamina Scale will not be around to help him when they go to look for Jura-san, so I need you to act as a bodyguard for Happy and also protect Lucy from any further harm. You saw Natsu when he saw how Lucy ended up. He's going to go on a warpath and not even I can stop him when he gets enraged. You know as well as I that Natsu's power is tied to his emotions. Before, Natsu's rage allowed him to possibly surpass me in strength, but with the power that Natsu possesses now he is capable of surpassing me. Gray gritted his teeth. The scarlet-haired mage had a point, several actually, as Natsu's Dragonslayer senses were far above most animals' senses, and when enraged before going into battle he was practically a juggernaut. Gray had learned the hard way not to make Natsu truly angry during their earlier days in Fairy Tail when he insulted Natsu for saying Igneel abandoned him because he was weak. Gray ended up in the medical ward for 3 entire days. His note to himself: never get Natsu angry. You won't like him when he's angry. The Godslayer of Shiva thought. Gray sighed and nodded in compliance. Fine, but you guys better be careful. I don't want news coming back to me that you guys got your asses kicked. Natsu then looked to Happy as the flying cat relayed all the information to him. It was a bit difficult to read the feline's lips since they were different from human ones, but after a few repetitions in certain parts he managed to grasp the entirety of it all. Gray walked up to Natsu and held out his arms. Natsu looked to Urza and she nodded to him and Natsu nodded back to her. The son of Igneel handed Lucy over to the ice make user. Natsu's pupils grew slitted and he growled. Keep her safe. Natsu forced himself to lower his voice since he usually had to overpower the ringing that resounded through his ears. Don't and I will tear you a new one. Gray chuckled as he took Lucy from him and nodded his head. Gotcha. Natsu smirked as he read Gray's lips before he turned away and began sniffing the air. Once he caught the familiar scent of the earth and, was that shampoo? Why would a bald guy need shampoo? Natsu thought. Shaking off the thought once he got a solid grasp on the smell that was Jura's scent, he pointed out which direction the other members of Lamina Scale had to go. Nodding in thanks, the 4 set off while Gray and Happy ran away with Lucy to go back to the safe zone that was the Alliance building. Natsu then tipped his nose skyward. His eyes widened when he picked up on the familiar scent reptile, feathers in the air. He took off with Urza trailing behind him. I'm coming for you, Oracion. Natsu thought with a growl. Insert music. Fairy Tale Tower of Heaven, Northern Wood Sea, Fury. Jelal Fernandez ran through the Wood Sea, the adrenaline pumping through his body making him move at speeds faster than he ever thought was possible due to his previously weakened state. Jelal put on a burst of speed using his heavenly body magic, a golden aura of magic energy coating his body as he did so. With the directions to the tree of Nirvana fresh in his mind, Jelal leapt into the trees, hopping from branch to branch so as to propel himself further through the air. How am I even doing this? Jelal asked himself as he flipped off of a branch. As he fell, he caught onto a lower one and used his momentum to swing himself back up. As he let go of the branch, he backflipped while moving forwards and then kicked off the thick trunk of a nearby tree with his left leg before kicking off another trunk with his right leg. The process was repeated numerous times as he moved in a zigzag motion before dropping down. He fell and went into a forward roll before he planted his feet firmly on the ground and pushed himself forwards and kept running, never once losing his stride. The adrenaline, the use of my magic. I'm supposed to have amnesia and yet I can do all of this. His eyes narrowed in thought. The Sky Dragonslayer, that Wendy girl, she had done something to him when she touched his forehead. He had felt a blinding pain and suddenly he got a burst of energy and adrenaline. She had obviously triggered something within him. She had said she would restore my memories, but it seems she only restored my body's memory of how to use magic as well as these physical skills. The idea was not exactly ludicrous, but then again this was a world where people spouted fire and energy blasts like it was water, which mages could utilize as well. Jelal clenched and unclenched his fists. I guess this is as much as she could do with respect to restoring my memories. She is only a little girl after all. As he ran, he stumbled suddenly as he suffered a sudden headache. Clutching his head, but still managing to keep running, the blue-haired man suddenly found the image of a massive tree. A tree taller than most of the trees in the wood sea, flashing in his mind's eye. The directions to the tree imprinting itself in his mind alongside the image. The images then vanished and Jelal found himself in the wood sea forests once more. Shaking his head, he blinked his dark eyes in annoyance and confusion. What was that? He muttered. Then his eyes widened as he began to piece things. Toge the Asli within the wood sea and his alleged teacher, Brain, had asked him for the location of something called Nirvana. It would make absolutely no sense for Brain to have brought him all the way from the coasts of the Fiorean Sea to the Wood Sea if the Wood Sea wasn't his objective location. By that logic it would therefore dictate that Nirvana was indeed within the heavily forested area. Maybe Nirvana is in that tree. The former insane slave thought. With determination blazing in his eyes, he took on another burst of speed. Now that I think about it, Brain was obviously going to use me to resurrect Nirvana and then kill me. Well then, Master Brain, let's see how you like it when I use the very spell you taught me to destroy your precious Nirvana. As Jelal continued to run through the forests, he was ignorant to the fact that the one who set him free from Oracion Siete was following behind him by hopping through the tree canopies. Wendy glanced down at her fellow brunette with ever-alert eyes, but with a glint of awe. My common sense tells me that I should stop following this guy and head back to Charles and the others in the Alliance because it is dangerous to follow him, but I need some insurance in case I might get caught by Oracion again. The Sky Dragonslayer thought. She bit her lip as her guilty conscience began to get to her, but she shook her head and forced back her instinctual thoughts of compassion. The pros and cons of being a healer and having a moral compass. With his recently returned memories of how to fight, Jelal can be a decoy for me to escape should a battle ensue and they are looking for him, as well as me. Given how adept he is at using his magic after just remembering how to use it, he must be really strong, so he's obviously not going to go quietly. She continued to follow after Jelal for a few more minutes, but suddenly Jelal broke through the brush and ended up in an extremely large clearing in the forest. It was much larger than any one of the clearings she had ever seen in the Wood Sea, mostly due to the fact that she had never been this far north. She stood atop one of the branches of the large trees that encircled the clearing and made sure to lower her magic energy signature and stick to the shadows in order to prevent herself from being found. A handy trick she learned from her Oni-san, which was rather ironic because the older Dragonslayer was a magic energy fountain and was all about the face-to-face approach, or rather fist-to-face. Wendy's brown eyes sparkled with interest as she watched Jelal stalk towards the center of the clearing. It was then she actually took notice of the fact that there was something present in the clearing. Her eyes widened as she took her eyes off of Jelal and found herself staring at possibly the largest tree in the entirety of the Wood Sea. It was approximately 300 feet tall and towered over the rest of the trees by a good 50 feet, though she wasn't sure of these estimations since they were mere speculation. The leaves on its branches were a much more vibrant shade of green and its roots appeared to be gnarly-looking claws that dug into the earth. Upon closer inspection she noticed that there were a few oddly written symbols etched into the trunk of the tree. They weren't kanji like with her Oni-san seals and they weren't runes, that much she could tell. The daughter of Grandine tilted her head trying to see if looking at the odd symbols from a different angle would prove to help her. Her chocolate-colored eyes then sparked with realization. She couldn't translate them, but she knew she had seen the symbols before. They are like the ones Master Rubol has when he writes things down, and one of them looks kind of like his forehead tattoo. Her eyes shifted back and forth as her mind raced. I need to talk to Master Rubol when this is all over. Wendy was snapped out of her thoughts when she felt the massive pulse of magic energy originating from Jalal's body. Jelal had walked up to the tree and placed his hands against the massive trunk. The nervate symbols around the tree's circumference began to glow with a violet light before the light began to spread over the entire tree. All 300 feet of bark, leaves and everything in between was now a massive pillar of light that seemed to stretch to the heavens. Jelal then recalled the one spell he knew in his repertoire that possessed enough firepower to bring the large tree-turned-light pillar crashing down. He made a few hand motions before planting one hand on his chest and the other on the tree. Rune magic. Self-destruct. Runes spread out over his chest and then began to snake its way along his outstretched arm and wrap themselves around the massive light pillar. Jelal smirked as he turned around and placed his back against the light pillar. Only just woke up and already I'm going to die. Again. It's official then. My life thoroughly sucks. He chuckled to himself as he felt the magic energy in his body beginning to pool at his core. From what his memories told him, rune magic. Self-destruct was a spell that took all the magic energy within a person's body and pooled it into the core of the magic circulation system. The magic is then released from the body at a literally explosive rate and travels along the rune chains that extend from the body. The effect would be devastating. There was only one plus side to the fact that he was about to commit suicide. His lack of life flashing before his eyes managed to pull up a single memory from the depths of consciousness. A very beautiful girl, in his opinion, with long scarlet hair and determined brown eyes. Looks like I'll never be able to figure out who you are in the end, Urza. Jelal prepared to release the magic energy within his body and closed his eyes as if to welcome the dark embrace of death. However, the meeting was cut short when a piercing scream echoed through the air. His black eyes snapped open and his head turned in the direction of the scream. The source of the feminine outburst was shown to be that of the blue-haired Dragonslayer. She was shown to have been tackled to the ground by a massive winged serpent. Cobra had leapt off just before Cubelios had struck at her prey and gave off a sadistic smirk as he watched the two females tussle. Cubelios hissed and bared her fangs, violet poison pooling at the tips. The large snake went to strike, but Wendy's arms shot up. Arms. She grunted out as she gripped Cubelios by the throat and aimed to hold off the powerful reptile. Jalal's eyes tore themselves away from the scene of the Dragonslayer's brush with death when the ground near the tree line began to warp and twist, which revealed Hot-Eye, his eyes glowing orange to show he had utilized his Heaven's Eye spell. So that's how he found us, Wendy thought as she managed a glance at the angular-faced man. Either that or they spotted the giant pillar of light. Charlie's smartass attitude always started to rub off on her when she was about to have a life-and-death battle. Wendy quickly managed to free one of her legs from underneath the white belly of Cubelios before kicking the female reptile harshly. The winged snake released a hiss of pain and reared up into the air as a result. With Cubelios no longer holding her down, Wendy vanished into the wind and reappeared a suitable distance away from her attackers. Angel and Midnight emerged from the skies above and settled on the ground. The bushes then rustled and were blasted apart by a beam of dark magic energy revealing Zabrak, Clodoa and Brain himself. Brain looked at Jelal, who was laying against the pillar of magic. The self-destruct rune on his chest pulsed as if it were commencing a countdown sequence. "You really think you could have stopped us by blowing yourself up with the very spell I taught you, Jelal?" Brain exclaimed. How? How did we find you?" Brain finished for him. A smirk came to his face. "Well, for one, we have a massive serpent who could track your scent, and with Hot-Eye's ability to see P in a wide range with his Heaven's Eye, it was child's play. That and the fact that there's a giant energy beam shooting up into the sky. So there's that too," Clodoa said. "You have no eyes. How exactly do you see?" Angel asked with a confused expression. "Wouldn't you like to know?" "Enough." Brain slammed Clodoa into the ground. "That hurt. Even though I am a skull and I feel no pain. Yo-ho-ho-ho-ho-ho. Brain glared at him. "Sorry, shutting up now." Clodoa immediately silenced himself, and with a nod of satisfaction, Brain turned back to Jelal. "Now then, let's remove that pesky spell, shall we?" Brain raced across the clearing and Jelal barely had enough time to register what just happened before Brain's palm slammed forcefully against his chest where the central explosive rune formula lay. The pulsing rune's glow was suddenly encompassed by Brain's own rune. Jelal could only watch with wide eyes as the runes around his body and the Nirvana pillar began to flicker before shattering like glass. With the runes effectively destroyed, Jelal was picked up by his throat and then tossed aside like a rag doll. Wendy gaped at what she just witnessed. So much for Jelal being a decoy for her. Brain had effectively incapacitated her decoy in under 10 seconds, and now there were all 6 of them and one of her. Jelal was still conscious, but the magic energy he had taken to utilize his kamikaze attack had left him drained and weakened his body. The daughter of Grandine met the harsh gaze of the Oracion Siete master, and he twirled Clodoa lazily in his hands. "Nirvana is active. We have no use for either of you. Kill them both," Brain ordered. Zabrak was about to offer his opinion on the matter of moving in to kill Wendy, but it was too late as Hot-Eye, Cobra, Cubelios and Angel all struck forth. Midnight's sleeping visage did nothing. "No," Zabrak roared, but as he was about to try and stop his fellow former slaves from attacking Wendy, they all froze when a loud roar echoed from the tree line behind Wendy. The roar was unlike anything they had ever heard before. Powerful, loud and bestial in nature, the roars echoed through the forests. "What is that?" Hot-Eye asked as he glanced around the clearing. Insert music. One Piece, let's battle. It can't be. Everyone turned around to see Midnight. The spiky black-haired mage had woken up, but his red eyes were wide with disbelief and fear. He held his arms tightly as if they would fall off should he let them go. He shivered on his magic carpet as the roars continued to echo through the air. Midnight, you're awake, Angel exclaimed with a mix of joy and shock. Why do you look so scared, Cobra asked. Midnight turned to his fellow dark mages before gulping loudly, the fear written across his face. It's them. As Midnight uttered those words, two of the large trees from behind Wendy blew apart as if they were struck with cannons. The large pieces of vegetation tumbled through the air before they exploded against the violet magic energy pillar. A massive dust cloud formed as the objects that knocked the trees aside crashed down onto the ground. The members of Oracion Siete were in shock as they watched the dust cloud before them. When the dust settled, Angel, Hot-Eye, Cobra and Midnight shivered in fear. None of them even noticed when Cubelios slithered away from the clearing, the memories of fighting the fire-breathing Kitsune making her do so. The four aforementioned members of Oracion, their eyes were wide as if they were staring into the jaws of hell itself. Brain, Claudoa and Zabrak watched with interest. Jelal and Wendy gazed up at the two figures that stood before them in equal amounts of awe. The wind rustled the spiky blonde hair and the crimson and black fur of the two figures respectively. Oh Oni-san? She turned to the horse-sized Kitsune, his three tails whipping wildly in the air. Kurama-chan? Wendy rose to her feet and her body trembled as she looked at the two before her eyes began to tear up. Wendy was about to run up to them, hug them, kiss them, express the very emotions she was currently feeling at having seen Naruto and Kurama again, but she halted herself when Naruto's voice echoed through the air. I gave you all fair warning 6 years ago. I broke your arms to solidify that warning. He pointed at Midnight and the reflector magic user flinched. But it seems that you all have not adhered to the conditions I laid out before you. I said that the next time you all dared to try and hurt my student, my little sister, I would hunt you all down, I would find you and I would kill you. The magic energy pillar of Nirvana suddenly began to take on a darker tone. Soon the deep violet became a stark ebony, a tower of black light. Everyone looked at the pillar of black light, but Naruto chose to ignore it. And I will kill why? Naruto froze suddenly as he felt a throbbing in his skull. The blonde Dragonslayer fell to his knees and clutched his head, gritting his teeth. His eyes flickered between shining white and startling sapphire. Kurama's and Wendy's eyes widened as they saw the Apocalypse Dragonslayer clawing at his head. Naruto, Oni-san, I don't know what's going on, Brain said. But even if you are said to be the most feared criminal in all of Fury, you are still a human and thus you can be killed. Naruto's body suddenly flinched at Brain's words. Oracion Siete attack. Ignore your fears and kill them all. Zabrak watched as Angel, Hot-Eye, Midnight and Cobra shook their heads and swallowed the lumps in their throats. They had told me what happened to them all those years ago, but to think the Ogo no Fujin and Onibi Mayobo had such an impact on them. The silver-haired titan turned to Brain. Brain, you're being an idiot, they're going to get killed out there. I have Nirvana now. You really think I care? Brain exclaimed, tossing away Claudoa in a fit of rage as he turned to Zabrak. Ow! The skull staff muttered as he slammed into a tree. And you have always been one to defy every single order I have given. You may be powerful, Zabrak, but I am the master of this guild. You, just like the rest of those slaves that I took from the Tower Heaven, belong to me. Now obey me and attack. Zabrak growled beneath his mask and remained rigid, but the other members of Oracion did as they were told. Fine. Brain snarled. He snapped his fingers and suddenly, the bindings of black magic energy sprouted out of the ground and tied down the massive man. Zabrak's eyes widened as he looked to his master. What the hell are you doing? Making sure you don't interfere. Brain replied with narrowed eyes. Your declaration of being Wendy Marvel's protector has made you an enemy of my guild now that we are in open combat. You will be an obstruction to the task and due to your great durability, I cannot effectively kill you without exhausting most of my magic energy to pierce though your iron like hide, so the best thing I can do is restrain you. Damn it, Brain. Zabrak roared. He pushed off against the ground and managed a few steps towards his former master. But Brain increased his magic output and Zabrak found the chains constricting themselves around him as they embedded themselves into the ground, pushing him down and keeping him restrained. The silver-eyed former slave growled beneath his mask, his heavy breathing being distorted due to it. You fucking piece of shit. When I break free, I'll crush you beneath my heel like a fragile doll you are. I'd like to see you try, but for now, let's enjoy the show at seeing the two most powerful criminals in Fury be subjected to defeat by my mages, nay? Zabrak tilted his head and watched as his fellow former slaves, people he went so far as to call comrades in arms, rushed off towards the two SS-class criminals, closing in on them. Kurama snarled as he snapped his head in their direction. Inhaling deeply, he unleashed a massive tongue of crimson flame from his jaws. Midnight took the lead and distorted the path of the flames. arching it and reflected it back at the two SS-class criminals. The fast-moving fire blast crashed into the ground and caused a massive, violent explosion. Midnight gulped as he watched the fiery dust cloud, and suddenly a burst of wind scattered the smoke and dust. Insert music. 2 steps from hell after the fall. Naruto and Kurama were crouched down, but rose to their feet. Kurama had managed to absorb most of the impact in the fire itself due to it being his own flames, but the explosive force behind the attack had done its job. The blonde grunted, shaking his head as the after effects of his headache remained. But he ignored the pain. The wounds covering his bare skin quickly healed themselves due to the healing factor granted to him by 5-point elemental seal. He looked down as he held Wendy in his arms. The Sky Dragonslayer was covered in dust and there were few burns that marked her body from the reflected attack, but her own healing factor was making quick work of the wounds. "Oni-san?" Wendy uttered softly. Despite being healed, the pain was still present in her body. "Don't talk, Wendy. I will take care of your assailants. Nobody makes an attempt on your life and lives to tell the tale," Naruto said. Wendy smiled softly at her older brother figure and nodded stiffly. "I really did miss you," she said as her chocolate eyes met his sapphire orbs. Naruto smirked beneath his mask. "The feeling is mutual, Maimo Udo." Now that he was this close to the 12-year-old, he actually managed to get a good look at her. Her baby fat was all but lost and the draconian features that marked as a Dragonslayer were much more prominent as her nails were much sharper and longer and her canines were much sharper than how they had been 7 years ago. He resisted the urge to roll his eyes when he saw that Charles had indeed been right when she said she based her clothing off of his own. But who was he to argue? Black was positively badass. He stroked her lengthy blue hair and tucked a few stray locks behind her ears. "You really have grown up, Sky Dragon." Her brown eyes seemed to brighten at hearing his approval of her current self. "Now rest and let your badass Oni-sensei take care of things here." Wendy giggled at how Naruto used the title she had given him when she was 5 and he was 13. She leaned up to him and kissed him on the cheek. "Thank you, Oni-san." Naruto's hard stare softened lightly. He then nodded before turning to the kitsune beside him. "Kurama, rest her and whoever the hell this is." He pointed at Jelal who had fainted from everything that happened. "Wuda wuss, off to the side. We don't need anything getting in our way." Kurama stretched out his tails and took Wendy and Jelal, placing them behind one of the massive oak trees. Insert music. Shingeki no Kyojin Gurren no Yumiya. Once Wendy's safety was assured, the two SS-class criminals turned back to their opponents. They twisted their necks as they cracked them in preparation. Naruto shook his head as he felt another pulse in his skull, his eyes flashing white with the headache. When the pulsation stopped, his eyes shifted back to blue. "Damn it! What the hell is going on?" He growled to himself before focusing on the task at hand. Killing Oracion Siete. Naruto scanned the area for his first victim and his blue eyes settled on one cobra. The brown-haired man flinched as Naruto directed his glare at him. "You die first." Kurama and Naruto stamped their feet into the ground before pushing off, the ground cracking from the force. Cobra quickly reacted and slammed his hands on the ground. Sound magic. Sonic impact. A large sound wave traveled through the air, ripping the earth apart before slamming into both SS-class criminals. They released roars of pain, clutching their sensitive hearing organs. Cobra then took a deep breath, a sickly purple and red energy swirling to life in his jaws. His skin became coated in scale-like patterns and his dotted irises became vertical slits. Claws and fangs replaced his human nails and teeth. Dokuryu no Hoko, Poison Dragon's Roar. A violent twister of poisonous magic energy rocketed through the air. Naruto and Kurama shook their heads as the ringing in their ears died down, but were suddenly knocked by the second-generation Dragonslayer's attack. Flipping in the air, Kurama and Naruto landed on their feet before snarling at Cobra. "You dare to use a dragon's power when it is not even real?" Naruto gnashed his teeth. His head pulsed once more and his eyes flickered white. "Do not insult my kind. You are an abomination, you second-generation Dragonslayer." "How did he?" Cobra never had time to finish his question when Naruto sped towards him, the wind whipping wildly around him. Cobra quickly held up his arms and Angel swooped in and grabbed him to take him into the air. As the two rose into the sky, a massive fist of earth raced towards Naruto, courtesy of Hot Eye. Naruto roared and unleashed a devastating shockwave that shattered the earth fist just as it was about to make contact with him. Kurama leapt into the air and lashed out with his tails, but Angel avoided them due to her having aerial superiority. She then flapped her wings harshly. Angel magic. Feather storm. The silvery white feathers descended towards their targets, but Kurama unleashed a powerful blast of fire. The fire blast washed over the feathers, turning them to ash, and continued on its path towards the busty mage and her Dragonslayer passenger. She dove downwards to avoid it, but as she did so, a shadow enveloped both her and Cobra. Mokashiryu no. Naruto froze as his eyes became blue once more, the white shine lost. Futon. K's no Yaiba. The momentary pause due to his personality's shifting gave Cobra and Angel enough time to avoid the blonde man's strike. The blade of wind managed to cut into Cobra's boot though and slash at his foot. Naruto landed on the ground and shook his head, snarling in annoyance and anger as he watched the two hover above him. "Damn it, Naruto, you had them. What the hell is wrong with you?" Kurama exclaimed. "I don't." Naruto's eyes flashed white. "I don't have to answer to you, Kitsune." Kurama's eyes widened as he saw Naruto's eyes continue to flicker between their white and blue states. Ever since that magic pillar turned into black light, everything with Naruto began to go haywire. His pauses in combat were going to get him killed. "Get down here," Naruto roared before shooting up into the air. With a bestial roar, he slashed at the white-haired woman. Angel barrel rolled and avoided the attack, but Naruto activated his ability to fly and altered his path and slammed into both Angel and Cobra. The two Orochimaru members descended quickly and were gripped around their throats within the small crater Naruto formed from their impact. He tossed Angel aside like a rag doll before focusing on Cobra. Cobra's hands became coated in poisonous magic energy that took on the shape of claws. Dokuryu no Sume, Poison Dragon's Claws. He aimed to slash at Naruto, but the Apocalypse Dragonslayer reacted quickly and removed his hand from the brown-haired abomination's throat and grabbed the man by both of his wrists, stopping the attack cold. Cobra's eyes widened as he felt the bones in his arms beginning to creak, and with his enhanced hearing he could hear the sounds of them about to break. And break they did. "Gah!" Cobra wailed as Naruto effectively snapped his opponent's wrists. Naruto grunted as his eyes flashed white, but neither his dragon personality nor his human one decided that they should lose the momentum they gained. The abomination. The blasphemy of Dragonslayer kind lay on the ground before them. With the mentality of a beast, Naruto tore off his face mask and opened his jaws. Cobra could only watch in fear as the first-generation Dragonslayer revealed his sharpened teeth. No one expected this show of brutality as Naruto's head flew down and clamped his jaws around Cobra's throat. The poisoned Dragonslayer flinched as Naruto's fangs tore into his throat. He were crushed and the veins in his neck were effectively severed. Blood flowed into Naruto's mouth, staining his once white teeth with the crimson liquid of life. With a growl, Naruto shifted his head harshly and literally ripped out Cobra's throat and spat out the flesh. He then gripped Cobra's skull and began to squeeze. A sickening mixture of squelches, snaps and cracks echoed through the air before Cobra's skull finally caved in from the force and was effectively crushed within Naruto's claws. With a flick of his wrist, blood and gray matter left his hands and he turned to the heavens and unleashed a savage roar once more. The blood-stained fangs and glowing white eyes made the Orochimaru mages flinch in fear at the sight. Kurama stared with wide eyes. So this is what it's like when the dragon within him has full control. The Kitsune was snapped out of his thought when he felt himself beginning to sink into the earth. Looking down, he found the earth beginning to liquefy underneath his paws. Glancing around, his crimson eyes searched for Hot-Eye, but the man was not visible. Not left, right, behind or above. Only option left. Kurama quickly dug his tails into the earth, extending them as if they were made of elastic material, is below. The earth rumbled and suddenly all three rear appendages burst out of the ground, wrapped tightly around Hot-Eye. The angular-faced mage was struggling to free himself from his bindings, but to no avail. With a roar, Kurama swung Hot-Eye against Angel and Midnight, knocking them away through the air before aiming to strike at Angel once more. The Angel magic user rolled to the side, but Hot-Eye was still damaged as he impacted harshly with the element he controlled. Kurama then raised Hot-Eye into the air and squeezed tightly. With a howl, Kurama set his tails on fire and the crimson flames climbed up Hot-Eye's body. The earth magic user could only struggle in his bindings as the fires consumed his body, his screams echoing through the air. The others could only watch in horror as their fellow former slave was burned alive. A loud crunch followed afterwards and Kurama constricted the body and snapped the charred Hot-Eye and then tore him in half. Kurama tossed the lower half of Hot-Eye at Angel, who screamed as the blackened and bloody half soared over her head and the upper half landed at the feet of Brain and Zabrak. Hot-Eye. Zabrak fell to his knees as he looked at the upper half of Hot-Eye. He was completely unrecognizable from how badly his body had been burnt and the blood that caked the burned form added insult to injury. Zabrak's body trembled with rage. Gate of the Scorpion. I open thee, Scorpio. The spirit summoned itself to the field and Kurama growled at the celestial spirit. Scorpio was a relatively tall, lean-built, dark-skinned man with short hair that was red on one side and white on the other. Attached to his rear was what Kurama assumed to be a tail. Said tail appeared to be like a large gun that was shaped like a scorpion's tail that had the word, Antares, written on it. He wore no shirt, but had a flower-shaped collar that was red and trimmed with gold around his neck. He had a red sheet-like material around his waist that was kept up by his large belt that has the Scorpio symbol on it. He wore black shorts, and had bandage-like material wrapped around his arms and legs. Sandbuster. The tail on Scorpio's rear stretched forth before it cocked itself like an actual gun. A massive twister of sand was then fired from it, tearing through the land and carved a trench in the earth from how fast and powerful it was. Kurama snarled and inhaled deeply. Goukakyu. A massive fireball tore through the air and exploded against the massive sand twister. The intense heat of the grand fireball turned the sand twister to glass, and Scorpio and Angel watched in shock as the glass was shattered when Kurama ran through it. In a blur of motion, Kurama appeared in front of Scorpio and slashed at the bare-chested celestial spirit. Scorpio quickly leapt backwards and fired off another burst of sand from his tail. "We are!" the spirit of the scorpion exclaimed as the attack made contact. Kurama skidded backward and howled loudly, generating a shockwave that sent Scorpio skidding backwards. Kurama ran forth and slammed his hand like forepaw into Scorpio's face and slammed him into the ground. Scorpio's tail worked its way around his body and then wrapped itself around Kurama's throat before the red-furred kitsune was thrown away. A sand buster followed directly after and Kurama skidded along the ground, but he dug his claws and tails into the earth to halt his movement. The three-tailed fox snarled before taking off like a shot, and Scorpio waggled his tongue before firing off multiple sand bullets from his tail cannon. Kurama leapt left and right to avoid the strikes before avoiding the massive twister of sand by heading skyward. Scorpio's eyes widened when the kitsune's body burst into flame. Fire rocket! Kurama sped through the air and descended like a blazing meteor before crashing into Scorpio's body with a resounding crash. The ground cratered beneath the celestial spirit's body and a massive amount of third-degree burns formed on the dark-skinned spirit's body. "Return to your world and I will not give you a more painful exit." Kurama's eyes shined with bloodlust. Scorpio immediately vanished as golden light. Kurama then turned to Angel, and the white-haired girl gulped before flipping 4 golden coins into the air. "The cost is 40. The coins vanished into the air as golden light before a massive pillar of white and blue light appeared. Angel magic. Barakiel the Archangel. The three-faced angel appeared before its user and unleashed a heavenly song. A massive explosion of light energy erupted from the angelic being and raced towards Kurama. However, before the kitsune could react, Naruto leapt in front of his partner and opened his bloody maw. The blue and white light became flexible beams as they entered Naruto's jaws. Vanishing down his throat, Naruto growled as his eyes flickered back to blue. He and Kurama then took off side by side. The fox jumped and tackled Barakiel in the chest, and the 12-foot-tall angel crashed into the ground. Naruto and Kurama then took deep breaths as their chests swelled. Futon. Furyuden. Gukakyu. Unison Raid. Karyuenden. They roared as the massive sphere of crimson flames melded with Naruto's wind dragon. A massive fire dragon barreled towards Barakiel, and Angel could only watch in shock as her toughest angel summon was completely immersed in a sea of crimson flames. Barakiel's heavenly voice unleashed crying sounds from its center face and screams of pain from the other 2 side faces. Barakiel was completely burned and vanished as golden light. Angel's gaping mouth suddenly leaked blood as she felt something digging into her chest. Her dark eyes widened as she glanced down and found Naruto's hands embedded right between her breasts, where her sternum lay. Futon. Kei's no Yaiba. Blades of wind stretched forth and protruded from out of her back, and Ainge coughed up more blood before Naruto moved one arm up and the other arm down. The sharp winds of his spell easily cut through the flesh and bone of her being, and Angel didn't even have time to blink before she was completely bifurcated by Naruto's attack. The vertically bifurcated dark mage fell apart literally before Kurama landed atop one of the halves of Angel's body, crushing it beneath his massive form, having grown to the size of an elephant with the addition of his 4th tail. Naruto then turned to his half of Angel. He grunted as his head pulsed once more, the dragon personality deciding to add insult to injury. The Dragonslayer began to stomp down on the remains of Angel's form. Bones snapped and blood flew everywhere, completely covering the blonde's boots and staining his face and chest when he stomped down on the remains of Angel's heart. Kurama and Naruto then turned to Midnight. And then there was one. Kurama muttered. Midnight ashake within their sockets as he stared at the result of the massacre that just occurred before him. He blinked and Naruto was suddenly gone from his sights. The least close combat effective mage of Oracion Siete was suddenly kicked off of his flying carpet and skidded on his front along the ground. A cry of pain elicited from the dark mage's lips as Kurama's monstrous form crashed down on both arms and legs, immobilizing him. Last time, the Fujin merely pulled your arms out of their sockets. Kurama snaked his tails around Midnight's arms and legs. Now let's see how you feel when I permanently remove them. No, no, please don't. Have mercy. Appearing to have materialized out of thin air, Naruto stood before Midnight and growled at him. You cry for mercy? He slammed his fist on the ground. You ignore my threat and you still go for one of the people I hold close to me. You humans are not deserving of a dragon's mercy. Kurama took that as his cue, and with a harsh tug, Midnight unleashed cries of bloody murder. The muscle fibers and skin tore apart, blood splashed across the grass-covered clearing, and with a final scream from the dark mage, Midnight was now dismembered in every single definition of the word, Tears flowed from the young mage's face as he was completely immersed in pain. Kurama dangled the arms and legs in front of Midnight as if to taunt him before tossing them to the ground before their owner, blood splashing onto Midnight's face. That was the last sight Midnight saw before Kurama stomped down on the smaller being's body. Damn it! Naruto held his skull and his right eye lost its white glow to reveal his sapphire orb once more. Give in to the bestiality of the dragon, Naruto. We are at our strongest when we fight together. Did you not see how we butchered them? You can combat even the Dragon King should you allow us to rule this body together. Shut up. We can fight just as well, Dragon, Naruto's human mentality countered. The only reason you even got a chance to fight was because our rage makes your powers more dominant. Acting against our Imouto is bound to cause mental conflict. But things have been getting worse since that magic pillar became a tower of black light. Don't make excuses, human. The boy wants the powers of the dragon, and when this is over, we will be the ones in control, human. Naruto's glowing eye became its original blue once the mental conflict came to a halt. He panted as he stumbled forwards, nearly falling to his knees, but he caught himself. His vision blurred and he felt as if he would black out from the pounding in his skull, but being the stubborn Dragonslayer he was, he fought against it. Naruto. You look a bit winded, are you alright? I'm fine. Naruto snapped. He quickly began to spit and wipe his mouth free of the remainder of blood that was in his mouth from when he tore out Cobra's throat. Once he removed as much blood as he could, he turned and stared up at Brain. You're next. Brain chuckled at the Dragonslayer's words before the ground beneath them began to rumble. The earth began to rise and Brain raised his outstretched hand, and by some telekinetic force, Cladoa rose up from the ground and flew back into his grasp. Naruto and Kurama leapt back to the tree line when the ground continued to rise. I think not, Ogo no Fujin, Onibi Myobo. And what would make you say that, human? Kurama spat with embers expelling from his maw. You see this pillar of black light? Brain pointed at it with Cladoa. This is the true form of nirvana when it begins to awaken, its initial stage. Initial stage? The two SS-class criminals spoke with confusion. Acnologia had never went into great detail when explaining the history of Earthland, and as a result, nirvana was not told about in great detail, as they were merely told that it was an ancient power that could shift the affiliations of darkness and light. That's right, and now the earth rises to reveal nirvana's true form. Brain stretched out his arms as if he were about to unveil something. Insert music. Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood Envy revealed. Behold! The power to subjugate the world. With that exclamation, the black light suddenly paused in its flow before reversing direction. Having once directed itself towards the heavens, the pillar of black light began to direct its beam into the bowels of the earth. The ground pulsated and visible veins of magic energy faded in and out of existence, their images forming on the destroyed grasslands of the clearing. After a few moments, the ground finally exploded beneath Brain's feet and he and a struggling, still-bound Zabrak rose into the air. Naruto and Kurama's confused gazes watched with restrained awe as a massive city burst out of the ground, Zabrak and Brain resting atop the base of said stone-constructed society. Towers, spires, buildings, houses, the whole 9 yards rose out of the ground and continued to do so. Lines of trees then began to fall as massive extensions of flexible stone were shown to explode out of the ground. Naruto turned to Kurama before grabbing the kitsune. Kurama released a yelp of surprise before the blonde ran into the forest and picked up both the unconscious Jelal and the frightened Wendy, and with a powerful push, launched himself into the air. Kurama shifted back into his Exceed form before grabbing Jelal from Naruto's arms. Sprouting his feathered wings, he hovered beside Naruto and watched the scene before them unfold. Naruto adjusted Wendy, holding her bridal style, and the brown-eyed Dragonslayer looked up at her older brother figure before turning in the direction that he and Kurama were looking in. The magic coming from that thing is really dark and it's making the air taste horrible. She pressed herself against Naruto's form as if trying to assimilate herself into his body. Naruto looked down and frowned as he took note of the fear in his former student's eyes. What is that thing, Oni-san? The once underground city of the Nervate rested proudly atop the land that once made the clearing he and Kurama recently fought in. Said land was shaped like a bowl, but was constructed entirely out of hard stone with the long roots from the trees stretching out of its body at random locations. A massive crater was left behind on the ground to show just how much of the earth had been removed with the rise of this monstrosity. It had to be at least 50 feet deep and about twice that figure in terms of diameter. Attached to the body of the lost city of the Nervate were 8 legs of stone, the same flexible stone that caused the trees to fall earlier. It was basically a cross between architecture and arachnid. The walking city then began to move its legs, toppling trees and cracking the earth with each step it took. That, Maimo Udo. He held Wendy a little tighter, is the exact opposite of nirvana.